Well, hello, everyone. Happy Friday. We made it through another week, and this is an especially happy Friday because, guys, guess what day it is? Reagan informed me of this earlier, and I had no idea, but I'm really, really excited. It is International Beer Day. Apparently, the first Friday of every August is International Beer Day. And so this really worked out really well for us because it happens to be happy hour. And of course, happy hour is a stream that I do on Fridays on my second channel, youtube.com/activelyunwoke, as well as on Odyssey, Rockfin, and Rumble for, well, as long as I'm streaming on Rumble, which who knows how long that will be. That's another story for another day. But we do happy hour where we kick back on a Friday afternoon, we have some drinks, and we watch a woke training. And today we might actually watch two, just depending on how it goes, because what I've got a schedule to watch is actually really short, but I thought it was a really good selection for today. It is called Advancing Equity in Your Classrooms. And so what we're going to be watching is a presentation by teachers teaching other teachers how to advance equity in school. So I thought this would be a great thing to start us off with. Now, another reason I chose this is it's about 40 minutes long, so it's not really that long, so we might actually be able to watch another one. And I do have another one picked out just in case we do have that eventuality. But this was filmed 2 days ago. So this is the latest and greatest, guys. This is the newest stuff, hot off the presses. This is not like when we sometimes watch something from like 5 years ago. This is exactly what teachers are teaching other teachers right now. We have Jamie over here. Jamie is a former director of operations and high school teacher. We have Leela, who is a special education teacher and high school dean. We have Anna, who is a former district assessment director and elementary school teacher. And then we have Yara, who is a former middle school and high school teacher and a department head. And they are all going to be teaching us how they integrate equity into the classroom. But I thought critical race theory wasn't taught in K through 12 schools. Well, I guess we'll find out, because as you guys know, if you're a happy hour regular, you know that every single time we hear the word equity, we need to be thinking Marxism, and we need to be thinking anti-racism, and we need to, yes, be thinking critical race theory, because, well, these are very different concepts. They do have different definitions. They mean different things. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have equity without having some amount of critical race theory involved. These things go together like peanut butter and jelly. They do have different definitions. Same with anti-racism. You can't have equity without anti-racism. You can't have anti-racism without equity. These are concepts that are completely correlated in how they actually manifest in the real world. So anytime we're hearing equity, you need to think critical race theory. Anytime we are hearing equity, you need to think systemic racism, anti-racism, all that bullshit. It is all the same. But that's not all. Because we only have a 40-minute presentation today, I found another one. And I found another one from exactly the same webinar provider, so it's all on their channel. And this one is about social emotional learning. So if we get through our equity presentation, the next thing we're going to watch is addressing external influences and social emotional learning. Because as we know, again, social emotional learning is different than critical race theory. Okay, these are two completely different things. Sometimes people like to conflate them to try to make it understand, but these are two different concepts. If you live in a state where critical race theory has been banned in schools through like in New Hampshire, we have a divisive concept bill that isn't perfect, but it's okay. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not perfect. But we have a divisive concepts bill, right? That bans kind of critical race theory. Okay. But it doesn't do anything to touch social emotional learning. And a lot of people think that these concepts are the same. And if one is banned, then the other is banned. That is not true at all. If you haven't specifically addressed what social emotional learning is in law, and I don't think there's a single state that's actually done that yet, except you could make the argument maybe that what Florida did with the parental rights and education bill, the so-called don't say gay bill, you could kind of make the argument that maybe they tried to kind of for kindergarten through third grade, but not really. Not really. If a public school took public money during the pandemic, social emotional learning is in that school. It was mandated as a part of law. Okay. So if we get done the equity one, and I'm pretty sure we will because we usually watch presentations that go like an hour and a half for happy hour, we can actually get a twofer today. We can get equity and we can also get social emotional learning at the same time. And this is also a recent presentation too. This was just a couple of weeks ago. This was filmed on July 14th, 2022. So all of the latest and greatest. Well, so that is what we've got on docket here today. Now, of course, we do have a couple orders of housekeeping before we get into the presentation. Number one, please mount that like button for me. Number two, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. Number three, if you appreciate the work I'm doing, I hope you will consider becoming a member in my Locals community. Locals is a bastion of sanity on the internet. And when you support my work via Locals, you're going to get access to some exclusive perks. You're going to get access to our 2 Zoom calls that we do every single week at 7 p.m. on Mondays and at noon on Wednesdays. We are going to be doing a Bitchcraft next week. So we do Bitchcraft the second Saturday of every month. So next week, we're going to be getting together on a Saturday at around 3 p.m. to just hang out, do knitting. That's what you're going to be able to get access to as well. You're going to get access to supporter-only Discord. Thank you, Breaking the Flaw, for tipping me on Odyssey. Let me just look over there to make sure everything is running as it should be. I really appreciate it, guys. I do always stream, not always, but like 90% of the time that I'm streaming, I'm also streaming simultaneously on Odyssey. And I definitely encourage everyone to go ahead and create an Odyssey account, subscribe over there as well, because it, of course, is an alternate in case YouTube ever boots me off or things like that. You're going to be able to find all of my content there. And I do absolutely appreciate support through Odyssey. It is my favorite YouTube alternative. I'm also on Rockfin and I am on Rumble. And of course, the best way you can support my work is by joining my Locals. You can join for $5 a month or more if you want to, but you don't have to. You can also join for $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You can also make a one-time gift, whatever is clever, whatever works for you. And just so you guys know too, if you don't feel comfortable joining Locals or that's not something you want to support through, I am actually going to be launching a Patreon next week. Now, I know you're going to say, Karlyn, everyone gets canceled via Patreon, but hear me out. I have been really, really trying to expand my audience to hit more politically homeless people, to try to get disaffected lefties involved, because I really do think that waking people up from the left is going to be one of the key ways we fight back against the woke. And I think I need to expand my offerings off of Locals in order to be able to do that, because Locals has a little bit of a reputation that it's only for conservatives. That's not true. Of course, anyone can join Locals, but I do want to be expanding my audience off of there. So if you don't feel comfortable for whatever reason with that platform, there will be more options coming soon. And you are going to be able to get all of the same perks as Locals gets, but through Patreon or something else. So that's going to be coming next week, hopefully. One more thing before we get started. Now, if you have not yet picked up a copy of my book, Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life, I hope you'll consider doing so. The book is out in hardcover and Kindle and audio version. The audio version is read by me, which was definitely pushing me outside of my comfort zone, to say the least. But I'm actually really proud of the way it came out. I think it came out really great. And if you have not yet picked up your copy, you can order it on Amazon, Audible, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever you get your books from. And you can head over to activelyunwoke.com and find some options there. And also, just to let you guys know, if you missed the event that I did with Gabrielle Clark this week, we did a live event. We actually just wrapped it last night. It was a phenomenal event. I cannot even tell you. I knew Gabs' story and I knew what she was teaching, and hearing the way that she presented it at this event, it was just amazing. If you missed taking part in the live event, don't worry. I'm actually working on getting it up on demand right now, and that will be up on activelyunwoke.com sometime this weekend, probably definitely by Monday at the latest. I just had to export a really large video file, and now I'm going to be loading it on and getting it all set up and on demand for all of you. So if you missed the event we did with Gabrielle Clark, that is going to become available to you at activelyunwoke.com. All right. Our last order of business is you guys have to help me pick out a beer. You do, because it's International Beer Day. Now, these beers are going to look really similar to the beers I had last week, because I didn't drink all the beers I had last week. You know what happened, though? Victor fucking drank my beer. And then, because he's a good husband and he didn't want me to be mad at him for drinking my good beer. He went to the beer store and replenished the beer that he drunk. So I married well. But here's the options for today. Our first one is going to come from Sky Gazer Brewing Company, and I really liked the can. I liked that it was kind of dreamy and looked like an alien. And this is called Sour Crusher. And this is a lightly fruited, refreshing, crushable, crispy sour ale with tangerine. And so that's going to be our Sour Crusher as option number one. Option number two is we have Blango berries. This kind of reminded me of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory a little bit, like the everlasting gobstopper, but it's not quite that. This is a sour ale with blackberries, mangoes, and lactose. Beers with lactose are like basically like the thing right now. I have mixed feelings about whether I like them or whether I hate them. I just don't know. I really don't. Sometimes I like them. Sometimes I think they're great. Sometimes I think the lactose is just really overdone and makes it really uncomfortable to drink. So it is kind of a coin toss about which it's going to be. And then I've got a couple of stouts. The first one I have is a whoopie pie stout from some brewing company. And then to wrap it all up, we have a peanut butter whoopie pie stout, also from some brewing company. And per our tradition at Happy Hour, I let you guys pick out via a poll, which is the first beer I drink. I've got them all set up in a poll. That poll is in the chat over on YouTube. Please let me know which beer you would like me to start off with. Do you want me to do the Tangerine Sour Crusher? Do you want me to do our Blackberry Sour with lactose and mangoes? Do you want me to do the regular whoopie pie stout? Or do you want me to do the peanut butter whoopie pie stout? The vote is entirely up to you guys. You get to pick it out for today. And once you're done voting, please go ahead and mount that like button for me, and we'll give you guys a couple minutes to vote there. And in the meantime, I'm going to get all set up so we can start our show. I hope everyone's had a good week. Please chat in what you're drinking. Oh, by the way, we can do bingo as well. Hang on, we can do bingo as well. And I do believe I put the bingo link in the description, but just in case I didn't put the bingo link in the description, I'll put it in the chat right here. And that way you can grab your bingo card. We do lines and corners for bingo. If you get a bingo, just shout it out in the chat. You don't win anything, except you get a hearty round of congratulations. And then when someone gets bingo, we go for blackout bingo. All right, let's see. Breaking the Flaws, drinking a nice cider. I'm a fan of cider. Some ciders more than others. Peanut butter stouts are weirdly good. They are weirdly good. Peanut butter, yep, I agree. I love a good peanut butter stout. Stephanie says lactose sounds like a weird ingredient. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it just really works. It makes the beer a little bit thicker. So I really do appreciate that about lactose, but sometimes it's just like weird. Sometimes it's just like real yeasty, and I don't understand it at all. But sometimes it really works. When it works, it works. All right. Let's see. We have a tie right now in the poll, so I'm going to be get your votes in. I'm going to be ending the poll in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ding, 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 ding. And it looks like by a nose. By a nose. We're starting with the peanut butter stout today, ladies and gentlemen. So let me get that all set up. And what I need to do is put the rest of my beer in my handy dandy cooler bag that I have sitting on the floor right next to me. Because I don't want warm beer and it's hot as hell. Is it hot as hell like where you guys are? Because Jesus Christ, I'm so ready for fall. I know like the pumpkin beers have started coming out. If I had gone to the beer store today instead of going with leftover beer from last week, I would have had some beautiful pumpkin beer. We're going to start seeing some pumpkins. We're going to start seeing some warlocks. Southern Tier Brewing Company. Best pumpkin beer. I love Sam Adams Oktoberfest. We are going to have Shipyard. Shipyard Pumpkinhead is an amazing beer. You can usually get it in your supermarket. If you've never had Shipyard Pumpkinhead, you need to. And the best thing to do with Shipyard Pumpkinhead is put in a shot of vanilla vodka with your Shipyard Pumpkinhead beer. Oh, you can even do a cinnamon sugar rim. Oh my God. I love pumpkin beers. They are the best. They are the best. All right. Oh, I hate you guys with it. So my office, my office, which is really my second bedroom in my house, it is like the only room in the house that does not have air conditioning. And I've got these slanted ceilings, so I can't even put like a window air conditioner in because the window that I have is like a skylight. Oh, it's so annoying. All right, let's get this beer poured. And then we can get our show started, guys. Maple stouts, yeah, maple stout. There are some maple stouts in the store right now. I saw maple stout a couple weeks ago, actually. You can usually get maple stouts year round if you go to the craft beer store. You got to go to the craft beer store though, guys. You can venture outside the supermarket when you're buying beer. Go to a craft beer store. Go to even sometimes like listen, man. Like there are even gas stations that are stepping up their beer game. But you will almost certainly have a specialty craft beer store near you somewhere. And just if you've never been before and you think you don't like beer, honestly, beer comes in every possible flavor that you can imagine. It's so good. Cheers, everyone, for our nice dark peanut butter stout. Happy Friday to all of you. Oh, man. Yes, I am aware that my stalker is on there right now. And, well, she is aware that I'm talking to defamation lawyers. How fun. Fun times. Guys, I'm sorry I haven't been streaming this week because, unfortunately, I've been on the phone with a lot of effing lawyers because reasons. But we will be resuming our streaming schedule next week. And I do apologize for people who have missed the streams, but I've had enough of this shit. And so I had to talk to some lawyers this week. So I apologize for that. But hopefully, I had a call earlier today that hopefully the situation will be starting to be taken care of. And then we can go back to our normal lives and focus on what we want to do and not worry about any teenage bullshit mean girl drama going on Twitter. All right, guys, let's get this party started. And we'll start with advancing equity in the classroom.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great week so far. Happy August. Can't believe it's already August. Time has really flown this summer, and we are in our final session today of our For Educators by Educators series, where we are talking about real topics that educators are facing on a daily basis in the classroom. We are so excited to have you here with us today to talk about our very last session on advancing equity in your classrooms. And we have a stellar group of Riverside Insights educators here today
subtitles.
to really
Sorry,
share some experiences about how they advance equity in their classrooms, and any issues that are really top of mind as we're thinking about entering this new school year.
Thank you for the reminder,
with how we can promote equity in our classrooms. Before we get started, wanted to quickly highlight that, as I mentioned, this is our 7th in a series of 7 For Educators by Educators conversations. And if any of these past topics have been interesting or look interesting to you and you were unable to attend our sessions, check out our Riverside Insights page and go to the Webinars and Events tab at the top, where you'll be able to see the recordings of all of our previous 6 For Educators by Educators conversations. You can also go to our YouTube channel where you'll be able to see the recordings as well. So hopefully, and be on the lookout, we'll be sending out, we're turning each of our For Educators by Educators conversations into blog posts. And so you'll be able to see, a synopsis of our conversations on the website down the road as well. So there will be plenty of opportunity to be privy to kind of some of the conversations that we've had earlier this summer, because they've been some great conversations with educators across Riverside Insights. So without further ado, would love to go ahead and get started today, because this is a pretty meaty topic that we have here. And while we get started, or for us to get started, would love for the group of panelists that we have here to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Good choice.
Specifically, who you are, what you're doing now, and what your experience is in education, and why you really care about this topic. Leela, would you mind kicking it off for us?
Yeah. So I'm Leela Day. I was a former special education teacher, high school dean in Chicago, was also our special education department chair for a number of years. Right now at Riverside, I serve on our HR People Insights team. I work with managers and bring in new talent to the organization.
Thanks, Leela.
An HR person.
Jamie?
teaching teachers? What
Hi,
could possibly
everyone.
go wrong?
My name is Jamie Ducette. I am the tech support manager at Riverside Insights. I actually joined the company this year back in February. I came from a high school in Brooklyn, New York. I was the 12th grade AP biology teacher, and I also was the director of operations for a few years there. So I kind of have a little bit of a different view on schools, just kind of going through the operations and logistics portion of what a school year looks like.
Wait for it.
Amazing.
Don't speak too
and Yara,
soon. Knock
last but
on
not
wood.
least.
My name is Yara Shutter. I'm based out of Texas, San Antonio, Texas, to be exact. I have some EC experience through undergrad, but taught middle school and ended with high school, 9th grade human geography and 10th grade AP world history. I now work here in customer service, helping support teachers with their assessments.
Amazing. And I'm Anna Hausman. I'm a product marketing director here at Riverside Insights.
So I just want to make something very clear. These are people who are former teachers. Every single one of them has been a teacher. And now what they're doing is they're working for this company that is selling service and trainings to schools. So these are people who are training teachers for how to show up in the classroom. And they do webinars and stuff like this in order to make more sales and to train more teachers. And those teachers are in like the public school system. Okay, so that's what we're looking at right now. We are looking at an education vendor who is trying to teach teachers how to teach their students.
I was previously an elementary and middle school teacher and a regional assessment director. So we've kind of have a group here that has some elementary, middle, and high school experience, some operational, some administrative experience, and we're really excited to talk about kind of what equity means to us in our classroom from our own experiences, and then some practical tips that might help advance equity in the classroom.
So
would love to.
In other words, just to put a really fine point on this, because people don't understand, like, okay, so I worked in the education consulting industry for a couple of years. I worked in higher education for like 10 years. I worked actually at colleges. I worked at Norwich University. I worked at Southern New Hampshire University. I worked at Dartmouth College. And I've also done consulting work for colleges too. And then I went to work for a higher ed consulting company. So a lot of people don't understand that there is a multi-billion-dollar business around consulting in education. And it's not just for higher education, which is what I worked in when I was earlier in my career, but it's also elementary school, middle school, high school. And so these are basically what I'm trying to say is these are people who contract to schools who get paid with taxpayer money. That's the big takeaway I want you guys to take from this. These are consultants that get paid with taxpayer money in order to do training and professional development for teachers that are teaching in public schools. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Hear from those folks who have joined us today. If you wouldn't mind dropping in the Q&A, if you have a couple of seconds. When you think of the word equity in a classroom, what does equity mean to you? When you think of the word equity in a classroom, what does equity mean to you? If you just could put your answer in the Q&A section, I would love to popcorn read some of those out loud as we start talking about this topic, because I think equity is such a powerful word that has taken so many different meanings, depending on the context in which you're talking about equity. And I think within the classroom environment, there's so many practices and systems and processes that really impact the equitable opportunities that your students have or do not have in the classroom or in the school. So would love to hear kind of from our audience what equity means to you in the classroom. And I guess to start, like, what is to Jamie, Yara, and Leela, what is equity?
Sin, those diamond paintings are addictive.
When you think about
totally
equity, what do you think about from your classroom experience? Does anyone want to kick it off?
I can kick it off. The first thing that comes to mind is really my own experience, like within the classroom, right? Like my 25 to 30 kids that I had in my classroom. How was I making sure that not only like my lessons were equitable, but like the experience that kids were having in my classroom were
They still haven't
equitable.
defined what equity is.
There were students of all different reading levels. You know, it was AP biology. There were kids who wanted to be scientists. There were kids who just were in the class because they did really well in junior year science and they got put in this class and they didn't love science. And so, you know, we also had students with different types of, you know, IEPs and 504s. And how was I making sure that I was being equitable not only to where kids are at, but also their learning needs, right? Like, was I equitable in making sure that my auditory and my visual learners were able to get what they needed out of the lesson? And, you know, some kids do better with like hands-on. How was I able to bring some sort of like project-based learning into an AP class? And just really thinking about that, because I think it's easy as a teacher to think, okay, well, personally, I'm a visual learner, so I'm gonna do this with diagrams. Well, some kids don't love a diagram and that means nothing to them. And so how is I being equitable in all those different dynamics, and making sure that I'm reaching every student in the classroom, regardless of their kind of their background?
I think I have a similar experience to Jamie, coming from like the AP side. The charter school that I had ended teaching at promoted AP for all, right? Like trying to get that access for everybody. So I had students in there who were like really big history nerds, and I had some kids who hated history, but either way, you know, trying to make sure they have an equitable experience. And I think something else I think about when I think about the word equity are the students that you have in your classroom and their backgrounds, because it's just so different, especially at the high school level. There was so much happening in these students' lives that I think it was so important to one, know your audience and know what they're all dealing with, so that you can bring compassion to the table, because I think that's also really key part in giving an equitable experience to all of the students.
Yeah, I think for me as a special education teacher, equity is really tied to inclusion, and making sure that I have an inclusive
They don't know what
classroom
equity means.
that
None
I'm
of these
also
people know
making sure I
So,
have an
okay,
equitable classroom.
hang on.
And so really meeting kids where they're at.
I had way too many windows open. So basically what I'm hearing, and you guys can let me know if you believe something different, these are all useful idiots. I'm not even sure, I'm not even positive this woman in the blue here buys into any of this. I think that she's just doing this because it's her job. So you guys got to keep in mind, like, these are people who are doing this to sell a product, right? And so maybe they're true believers in that product. Maybe they've talked themselves up to believing in that product. My impression as of right now is that none of them actually understand the game that they're playing. Except maybe that I just have a sneaking suspicion that this woman in blue kind of understands what's going on, and she just doesn't care because she's just doing it for her job. And she's just like, this is probably like all stupid, but she's doing like the best she can. I could be proven wrong. That's just my instinct kind of gut impression.
Knowing what they need and providing like the appropriate accommodations and modifications, and doing my due diligence as the adult in the room to make sure that I am creating the learning space that that kids can be successful in.
I think that's spot on. And a couple folks put their thoughts in the chat that I wanted to share out. Two in particular, Haley said that equity is not only important for us to teach, but also for educators to be self-reflective of their own knowledge, views, and backgrounds. And that's something I think we definitely want to touch on in a couple of minutes. And then Dion said that each child receives what he or she needs to be successful. Yeah, 100%. You know, and it's really interesting. I think the National Equity Project defines equity.
Oh, here we go.
Educational equity means that each child receives what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. And so
each child receives what they need to be able to develop to their full academic and social potential. So what does that mean? What does that mean? From each according to their ability, to each according to their need? Does anyone know where that comes from? Each child receives what they need in order to develop to their full academic potential. That's what that blonde woman just said. I'm comparing that to a quote, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Where does that quote come from? I know you guys know the answer to this. I know you do. I know you do. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That's Marxism, baby. That's Marxism. Marxism. That's Marx. So I mean, think about how sneaky these, because it sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds good to say we're just giving each student exactly what they need in order for that individual student to reach their full potential. But then you think about it in contrast with from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, and it starts to look very, very different. That's a literal quote from Marx.
That involves the right instruction to meet their needs, the right social emotional support to meet their needs, the right curriculum, the right types and modalities of learning, the right environments in the classroom, and all of these different systems and processes and touch points with a student kind of feed in to provide that true personalized learning experience to meet that child's specific needs. So it's really all about like differentiating the learning environment and differentiating instruction and differentiating the support to meet that child where he or she is, and ensure that that child has what he or she needs to be able to thrive long term. It's kind of the culmination of everything we've talked about these past 6 weeks in our Phoebe discussions, right? Like, how do you build a culture of inclusion? How do you build those systems of intervention? So like how, when you think about your own classroom experience, I know you all kind of touched on this a little bit, were there specific systems and processes that you were able to implement, or that you reflect upon you wish you had implemented, that would have really been able to advance equity in the classroom? Or like, where do you see within your own classroom, equitable practices play out and impact students long term?
I think one of the things that we talked about, I taught primarily like reading and English, and so text selection was big. Thinking about choosing texts that affirm my students' identities. We wanted to make sure that we were, reading things that not only felt relevant to my students, but that they could connect with. And so part of that was sort of like that intentionality around curriculum and what we chose to put in front of students.
Yeah, I would say also just to kind of build. Oh, sorry, Yara.
No, go ahead.
Just to kind of build off of what Leela said, and I think the first comment, Anna, that you read, I think you had said from Haley. I think my experience being out of the classroom and in admin, one of the biggest things I think that was really powerful and really important was like getting that sacred time with the adults in the building to really do that self-work and self-reflection and figure out what biases we were bringing into the building and what preconceived like thoughts. And we all have a past and we all bring with us what we've learned, whether it's purposeful or not, right? Like I think it kind of goes into like the intention versus impact type of thing. We can all have, I think everyone who becomes an educator has excellent intentions. That is not always the impact.
All right. Maybe I'm wrong. And maybe she is a true believer. Anytime we hear someone talking about intention versus impact, that's generally gonna mean someone speaking SJW, but I guess we'll see. Anytime you hear someone say intent versus impact, that's gonna be a warning sign that person is very social justice-y.
Though. And so being really mindful about the self-reflection work, especially, the school I worked at was a charter school in Brooklyn, and it was 100% Black and Brown students, and we had a very diverse staff. And so where were we having, making sure we had those conversations with our diverse staff about what we were bringing with us to the classroom to ensure that we, are reflecting on it and bringing equity. And I think making sure that we actually put time aside, because I think that was one of the things as the pandemic took off and there were just, things were crazy. That was the first thing that schools like deprioritized. to make sure that we had lessons ready to go. And I think that can be really harmful to the equity of the school experience, not necessarily just in the classroom, but the entirety of the experience.
I think maybe a closing thought here. I like how Leela brought up meeting students where they're at, and I think it's maybe a phrase we hear really often in the education community that's so impactful, right? And I think a big part of equity is meeting students where they're at, especially in knowing your students. And I think in self-reflection in my career as an educator, that's one of the best things I did to ensure equity was really getting to have these personal relationships with these students and understand.
Show of hands. Well, I can't see your hands. Show of hands in the chat. How many of you don't feel comfortable with public school teachers having a personal relationship with students? Because that's what that teacher with the headphones, that I guess former teacher now with the headphones, just said, is that she developed personal relationships with students. I don't think a teacher, especially a young teacher, needs to develop personal relationships with students in order to effectively teach them. But I think we can make the assumption, because they're literally saying it right now, that these people are teaching teachers how to develop personal relationships with students for the sake of equity.
Like all of the things that they were going through, like when the pandemic hit, one of my best students just did not attend any of the Zoom classes. And I was like, why is this happening? And instead of just marking out, well, 0, 0, absent, I called the student up and was like, hey, what's going on? Well, the time I had my class was the time her 3 younger siblings also had their class. And she was the parent essentially of these 3 kids. And so it was so important for me to be able to, like, okay, well, let me work with you so that you can figure this out, so we can get through this together. That way you don't stop learning. But I feel like if you don't have those relationships, if you're not meeting those kids where they're at, you're not able to provide them with the support that they need. So understanding your audience and meeting the kids where they're at.
That's such a powerful story, Yara. And I think, really agree with that point of understanding where your kids are. Something I've been reflecting upon a lot since leaving the classroom is, did I as a teacher have the right instruments in place and assessments in place to actually understand what my kids needed and understand what my kids, where my kids actually were. I think, I taught similarly in a very low income environment that was focused 100% on passing the state test. And so all of our, metrics for academic growth and things like that were revolved around what kids were learning on a day-to-day basis, but that didn't give me a checkpoint as to what kids' natural innate strengths were, or what kids' social emotional capacity and bandwidth was. And I think if I had had some tools that, I think just the focus on achievement growth and just the focus on social emotional learning, not social emotional learning, mastering those standardized test skills, really did create a system of inequity for so many of our students, because I just didn't have the information and the data to really understand where each of my students was and what I needed to give them in the classroom. Jamie, you touched upon kind of being culturally, or Leela, you did too, being culturally responsive, taking the time to understand our own biases, our own backgrounds, what we're bringing to the table, and checking what we need to check at the door so that we can provide the most equitable instruction possible for our students. What are some ways that you did that in the classroom? How did you ensure that you were being as culturally responsive as possible to meet your student needs?
I think one of the things that was the most helpful, we did a lot of readings, but I think, to be honest with you, I think one of the most powerful things that I was able to do was I really found a cohort of people that I worked with that identified the same way that I did, that I was able to have very candid conversations with. I would actually ask a good friend of mine to come observe my classroom. and, you know, check for those types of things, you know, in addition to, you know, the rigor of my lesson, etc. But really just like being open to, it's very hard, I think, to have those conversations. Not, for a lot of folks, it's not like a natural thing. It's not something they're like growing up talking about all the time. And so I think just being really open to feedback about it, and having friends kind of sit in on the class and, you know, pick up on tone and kind of the soft skills that you develop as you get older, and maybe aren't as aware of, because when you're writing a lesson plan, you're not writing in your biases, right? Like that's not, it's not a conscious thing. And so I think that was honestly the most helpful, was just like being open about it and having friends kind of come in and observe and see how those things kind of live in my class.
I think as a history teacher, this was something that was like very easily like integrated into my classroom, just because obviously so many of these topics that we cover in history classes relate back to these students in some form or fashion, right? So as you sit down and like write your...
So in history class, it was very easy to integrate equity. Does anyone in the chat want to take a guess about what type of equity she was introducing as a middle school history teacher? Anyone? I know the chat is delayed, so I'll just give you guys a second to try to answer here. What type of equity was she integrating into her class as a middle school history teacher? Ding, 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 ding. The 1619 Project. The 1619 Project. Yeah. Probably stuff related, anti-racism. Exactly. 1619 Project, anti-racism. That's exactly right. Well done, guys. Well done.
Your lesson plans and you're thinking of like, how do I catch the students? How do I bring them in? Like, how do I make this relate to them, right? Well, how do I make this matter to them? So it's not just, you know, page 36 of the textbook. Tying in their own experiences, letting them relate, letting them connect, letting them share their stories, share their background, really invested them so much more in their learning and their education. And I feel like that was such a seamless way to like tie their culture and their like family's experiences into what we were reading, into what we were learning. And if there was something that was like a really hot topic that everybody was like really going on, because my school was 100% minorities, we live very close to the Mexico border, like everybody in my class was predominantly Hispanic. So there was a lot when we were talking about like colonization and stuff. Like it was a very big heated topic that they were very passionate about. So like being open and having these conversations, like, yeah, we could, let's.
So middle school students in history class on the Texas border were very excited and passionate about colonization. Golly gee, I wonder what she was teaching in that class to make 13-year-olds, 12, 13 years old, that's how old people are in middle school, right? 12, 13-year-old kids deeply passionate about colonization. Sounds like anti-racism to me.
Stop here and let's keep having a conversation about it. Like, let's go further. Like, what else do you want to know about it? What else can we learn? So it was very easy to tie that into, I think, a history setting.
Yeah, I think that there, for my specific context, we had a lot of conversations. I had a lot of conversations with my co-teacher about like co-creating the space with students and families and parents. And so, you know, really like Jamie said, like making sure that I had someone to like bounce ideas off of, that I like trusted and could sort of be real with, but also being real with students that like, this is our intention. Oh. This is what we're trying to.
Hang on, I forgot a super chat. Oh my gosh, I feel so bad. It was a good super chat too. Hang on, I apologize. Oh, where was it? Oh no, I definitely saw it come in earlier. Now it's not showing up. Hang on. I have to make sure. I think I thank the person who sent in the super chat at the beginning, and I'm really apologetic. I saw it come in earlier, and I thought it was going to show up on the screen, but it didn't once I logged into StreamYard. So I apologize for this brief interruption, but I thank people when they send in super chats on this channel because that just does support the work I'm doing. All right. So we know him as Murphy's Pool, but today he's going by Nancy Whiskey Tits Pelosi. And this is why we love Murphy's Pool. He says, during this happy hour, I ask for everyone's support for my husband, Paul. I ask everyone to go to your favorite bar, drink 6 to 8 Beefeater martinis laced with mescaline, and drive home at a high rate of speed in his honor. Thank you, Nancy Whiskey Tits Pelosi, for your super chat. I greatly appreciate it.
To do. And I taught high school, so like they got it, they understood. Like they, if you're 16, you've seen a lot, and living in the city of Chicago, like you've seen a lot of things in your life. And so really it was about co-creation, not just with the adults in the building, but also like with the students together.
I think that's huge, Leila. And even though like you taught high school, I taught elementary, and that was something I still tried to do with my elementary students.
Oh,
and
really?
One of the tactics that I found
elementary
to be
school
really
students.
effective is, all 100% of my students were Black or brown students from the South Ward of Newark, and I was really honest and transparent with them. And sometimes I said, I don't look like you, and I know that. And so I don't know what it's like to X, Y, or Z, and can you help me learn? Or if my tone was
okay, so this was a teacher of elementary school students. So elementary school students are between the ages of 4 and 10 or 11. And she is asking elementary school students to teach her. That's Palafieri, everyone.
off with a specific student.
I think that's his name. I can see the
really
name.
Hard to go up and apologize and just say, I'm so sorry. I got frustrated in that moment. And like you get frustrated sometimes, so do I. And I really apologize for that tone. But I think having like someone, and even like this.
Why is she giving her elementary school students a tone that would necessitate her apologizing, getting frustrated? What sort of tone is she giving to students between the ages of 4 and 11 that she then has to go and apologize for later? That doesn't sound very good to me.
Students would start to hold me accountable as a teacher.
Then, the students would hold her accountable. Like,
oh,
good.
Hey, I was Miss K at the time. Miss K, like, I think maybe you could have said that a little differently. And it was such a good learning experience of creating a classroom culture where we were all really holding each other accountable. And like the students, even the kindergartners and the fourth graders, like felt like
kindergartners. She is allowing herself to be held accountable by kindergartners. This is something you're going to see come up a lot when it comes to teaching things that involve anti-racism. Okay, in anti-racist teachings, and we've seen this in particularly with anti-racist math. And we actually almost watched an anti-racist math teacher training today. Maybe we'll do it next week. But then I found this one, and I thought this one would be better. But we've seen this directly with anti-racist math textbooks, where anti-racist math textbooks will literally tell the teachers that they are not allowed to correct the students and that they should be looking to the students to tell them what the answer is. So this whole learning from the students thing, it goes back a long way. James Lindsay used to teach me about this before he got his ass booted off Twitter, and I'm really upset that he got his ass booted off Twitter. I don't exactly know what I'm going to do about that, or if he can even do anything about. I think, okay, this might be a controversial opinion. Side note, I think James Lindsay wanted to get kicked off Twitter. I think he did. I think he wanted to get kicked off Twitter. I think he was sick of it. I think he was like basically kind of a little bit losing it on there. And I think he knew it. And I think that he orchestrated his own suspension from Twitter. I think he was basically daring Twitter to suspend him for a while. Now, that doesn't mean that I think James Lindsay like wanted to give up or anything like that. But I really do think that James Lindsay wanted to prove a point by getting kicked off of Twitter. I also think that Twitter caused him a lot of stress. And just based on what I've seen, and I mean, I could be wrong about all of this. This is pure speculation, but I think he wanted this, and I think he orchestrated it. I did. What did he say on Twitter? He called someone a the thing that finally got him banned was he called someone a childhood sexualization specialist instead of a groomer. People apparently were mass reporting him last night and they got him. It was going to happen. Guys, like, let's just be real for a second. We're all going to get kicked off Twitter at some point. I am absolutely going to get banned from Twitter at some point. I'm absolutely going to get banned at some point. I purposefully avoid things that are like, I purposefully do not talk about the gender stuff on Twitter because I don't want to lose my Twitter account. But I know I'm going to get banned at some point. James, we're all going to get banned at some point, just the way it goes.
They could say something to their teacher in a respectful way and help me grow and learn too. I think that the student voice is so important to like help create that inclusive classroom community.
There's something that Leela also said that is really sticking with me, just not only just making it inclusive with the students, but like the families. And
Yes.
that being, I think the partnership between a school, especially again from like an admin point of view, like the relationship that you build with parents and guardians, and really taking into account like what it is that they want to see, right? Like when we think about, I don't know, like back to school nights and progress report nights and those types of events, like how, do you have a parent council that can help kind of build what that looks like and what that feels like? Is there, space to have parents kind of be part of building the community, to make it just feel more like a community?
And this is why I question if this woman is really a true believer or not. Because teachers, okay, so let me know what you think. This is just a theory. I haven't fleshed this out yet, so I would be interested to know what you think in the chat. People who are true believers don't want the parents involved. People who are true believers do not want parents involved at all. People who are true believers they actively think that parents are unsafe for kids. They think that other people's children are their children. So just based on the fact alone that this woman is talking about, well, how do we get parents more involved? I kind of think that she's kind of like, either she doesn't know what she's talking about or she really is kind of playing both sides. But that to me is like a dead giveaway. We never hear I've watched a ton of these teacher trainings. We never hear them talk about how they want parents involved, because they don't want parents involved. They think that they are the parents. And you can even see, look at the face this blonde woman is making. This woman in the blue down here is like, how can we get parents more involved? Look at the faces. Look at the face. She's like, no. Nancy Whiskey Tits Pelosi says, I have been kicked off Twitter 14 times. 14 times. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And it is just like your kids going to school. Like, this is actually our space. It's our safe space, and we built it together.
Yeah,
100%.
that like taking away that like transactional model of teaching, and like making it sort of this experience for everyone.
I think that's so important. I'm working very closely with a school right now in New York that is revamping its mission statement. And when they originally wrote the mission statement, it was a top-down mission statement. Like, it was a school leader, school board mission statement. And now their approach to revamping it's really powerful. They have, they're doing student focus groups, parent focus groups, involved parent focus groups, parents of students who are chronically absent, like parents of the community who are not parents of the school, and just trying to get this.
Hang on. I want to, Stephanie's saying something really important. Stephanie's saying the teachers at my son's grade school did not want the parents involved in any classroom activities. This is a really good test, guys. If you have kids in school, do your kids' teachers want you involved? Are your kids' teachers making proactive efforts? How would your kids' teacher react? This is a fun experiment. How would your kids' teacher react if you asked to sit in on a class and just watch? How would your kid have you FOIA'd your kids' teachers' emails, because you can do that. If your kid goes to a public school, then all of your kids' teachers' emails are public record. You can FOIA any email based on any keyword. So you can ask to see all of your kids' teachers' emails that say critical race theory, or all of your kids' teachers' emails that say anti-racism, or that say equity, or that say 1619 project, or anything. You can pick any keyword you want and FOIA your child's teachers' emails. And what's going to happen when you send in your FOIA request or your public records request, depending on what the state is, what's going to happen is you're going to get an estimate back from the school to say, this is how much money it would cost to get this information. And based on that estimate alone, so if you say, I want to see my kid's teacher's emails anytime she uses the term anti-racism or anti-racist or critical race theory, and you get back a small estimate, that means your kid's teacher is really not emailing about that stuff, and that's good. If you get back a large estimate, that means that your kid's teacher's emailing about that an effing lot, and you need to be worried. And you don't have to pay the estimate, okay? Most of the times those estimates are negotiable anyway. You don't have to pay the estimate. Just get the estimate. And then ask yourself, is it a big estimate or is it a small estimate? Because if it's a big estimate, you have something to be worried about. If it is a small estimate, it's probably okay. And that might be enough information just to get started. But like, seriously, guys, if you have kids in public schools, send in FOIA requests for their emails.
Comprehensive voice to build this mission statement from which they can really create the values and the protocols and the systems of the school that reflect that mission statement. So even thinking about, something like a mission or shared culture or shared values, and like how you can get the different student and parent voices involved in developing that so that it is a co-created process and really everyone is interested and excited about like building the same equitable environment. I think that Jamie, you brought it up like during the height of COVID, it was really hard. You were so focused on so many other things in the school that were, for lack of a better term, like emergency situations, like so many days. How do you ensure that you can keep equity top of mind, even when you're running kids to a school bus or ensuring that kids get fed, like all of the.
Why are you ensuring that kids get fed? Are you their parents? They're not your kids. Why are you assuring the kids get fed?
Urgent aspects of a daily school. How do you do that simultaneously and keep equity top of mind?
I think for that time period, like when it was, and again, this was New York City, this was an epicenter of it all. Equity, the way we looked at equity changed for a little bit during that time period, because it became less about, these biases that our teachers might be coming into the space with, and, kind of the details, right? Like it became more of like, our students were losing parents, they were losing grandparents. Like we had a student pass away, like we had some very traumatic things going on, and it became like, are you okay? Like, where are you? It was just a different response to what we would traditionally, talk about in terms of equity. There were just, you see the counterparts, right? And like, suburban outside of New York City, all of these private white schools have access to certain technologies and, different subscriptions, things that we just didn't have. So how do we ensure that our kids are still learning and that they are safe and that they, have the technology that they need to learn virtually? It was just such a sudden.
Did you notice she just called the white schools the basically the rich schools? She said the white schools are the rich schools and the non-white schools don't have what they need to be successful. That seems a little racist to me. They aren't just white kids going to those private schools. They aren't all white. I mean, many of them are, but they're not all white, and it seems kind of racist to think that they all are. Just like it's kind of racist. And like, you want to know, like, what is the most likely thing for a white liberal to say? The most likely thing for like a white liberal to say is that all Black people are poor. That's not true. Not all Black people are poor. That is provably wrong. But white people, white bougie liberals tend to think that all Black people are poor.
Everyone left everything in their lockers. How do we get their things to them? There was so many layers of it that we had to really take a step back and look at what other schools in other areas were able to give, and how do we get there as well to make sure that our kids are not falling behind. And I think that's really what the focus became. It was more of a shift. It wasn't like a taking away of, we're not concerned about equity. Equity just looked different during the height of the pandemic.
I had a very similar.
I think that is.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I had a very similar experience, especially with the pandemic, where it became very clear to see this shift in equity, where there were schools on certain sides of town who, well, everybody already had iPads and everybody already had hotspots and this and that, the other, and my kids did not. And so it was a struggle of like, well, what can we do to get the technology in their hands? And like, we had a group of teachers all go out with our library cards and get hotspots like from the libraries and like deliver them to the kids. And like, because we were able to get computers, but not internet, and a lot of kids without internet. And so it was very clear to see like that big shift in as a whole, not just a classroom, but like different areas of your local city or whatever that have more access or easier access to things that other schools don't. So I feel like that was, while it was a terrible and stressful time, right? It was a good eye opener to, are our kids having the access that they should be having, and how can we sort of move that forward? And equity, I think, like Jamie mentioned, it didn't stop, it looked different. And the things we were prioritizing were different, but still essential in creating that equitable experience.
And I think like to both of your points, like that to me feels like actual equity, like giving, like, oh, you don't have internet, like I'm gonna give you a hotspot, or like right, they can't meet their academic or social potential if we're like grounding that in the definition of equity without some of those tools and resources. And so I sort of think about how we acted during the pandemic, sort of like urgently getting kids what they need.
If these people were focused more on class issues and they really were splitting things up by class to say, listen, just when we are all of a sudden doing distance learning everywhere, it's just a reality that poor students might not have like internet access, they might not have the nicest computer, we're going to need to help them out. And those poor students can be Black, they can be brown, they can be white, they can be Native American, they can even be Asian. And it's not really about race, it's just about socioeconomic status. If these people focused more on socioeconomic status than they do on race, I would actually not have a lot of problem with this, to be honest. But when they call the rich schools the white schools, I think we know exactly what they're focused on and exactly what they think.
Like, could we now be urgent in other ways, like now that things have sort of died down, like what do we need to continue to be thinking about? That's a little less, all hands on deck, everyone in it. But just like, what are the day-to-day things we need to be doing?
Absolutely. And kind of as we're thinking about, because I know schools, believe it or not, are starting in some areas of the country, about to start in some areas of the country. I think it's top of mind for every educator and administrator, like how to provide the right resources, the right instruction, the right, support for each of the students in their school or in their classroom this year. If you were an administrator, if you were talking to an administrator, like what professional development would you say really helped you when you were a teacher to think about advancing equity in your classroom? Like, are there specific, like as administrators are preparing for back to school professional development and teacher training and things like that, like what what PD did you find really impactful for your own like development in advancing equity in the classroom?
I think one of them for me, and this kind of reverts kind of back to my first comment about like different learning styles, is that my experience, the school I worked at, we didn't, and this is so different from like my high school experience. My high school experience was like gen ed students and special ed students were separate. Like they were in separate spaces. And that is not at all the way that the school that I worked at runs. We actually had, learning specialists who worked with the group students, but they all went through the same professional developments. They lesson planned together. There wasn't a separation. And the way that our Dean of Special Services worked with the academic deans, like they were a team. And I think those professional developments around like how we work with co-teachers and how we modify lessons and having that perspective every single time I wrote a lesson plan of someone being like, okay, well, this student has, this written into their IEP. How are we making sure that we're modifying for them? And, thinking about, okay, this student is a hands-on learner, this student is, whatever the breakdown was, having that as like an everyday really just increase the amount of times you think about it, as opposed to like, here's my lesson plan as an afterthought, modify it. It was a together thing. And so it just becomes ingrained in the way that you write lessons and the way that you show up in the classroom when you are constantly talking about it and working on it together.
I feel like my experience is more of a grow, like something I wish that my school system might have done, like to address this a little better. We would have like quarterly, like whole group PDs with like every branch in town, essentially, of this school. And you got to choose essentially what PDs you would attend. There would be a whole bunch going on, at once, and like you got to sign up and select the ones you wanted to. And it was like, one from this box, two from that box, one from that box. Just make sure you get something done. And it always felt like even though there was always one on like inclusivity and like working through your biases and like that sort of thing, that was always the most empty one. And if people were there, it was because they had to check off a box. People were always so quick to sign up for like the instructional ones. And I feel like the emphasis wasn't really placed on those. And as a history teacher, like those were the ones I was most excited for, like that I thought brought the most value. So I think maybe as like administrators or maybe like educators who, well, everybody can speak up and raise their voice on what they need, right? But I feel like that's something that just an attitude around it holds a whole lot of weight, saying like, hey, make sure that you prioritize like going to one of these trainings. Like I want to see, report back to me, like what you get from that. Like, because it always felt like that was something that was kind of pushed off to the wayside and people were really excited for their content and not so much like the other stuff that they had to do per se.
Yeah, in thinking about like I'm not a school administrator, but in thinking about sort of like advice is like, if you think it's the right thing to do in August and talk about in August and September, like it's also the right thing to talk about in, November and December and February where things are really, really hard. Like just making sure that conversation is a continuous conversation throughout the year, as opposed to like we did it, like Yara said, like check the box PD at the beginning of the year because we were thinking about it. But like that is an ongoing conversation that is like weaved into the content conversations and the discipline conversations and the school, operations conversations, that like all of those things can benefit, all those conversations, those meetings, right, can benefit from a lens of equity.
Such a good point. And I think it all starts from that point of self-reflection. Like if you have the time and the space to really understand who you are, where you're coming from, why your personal story matters too, and then be able to understand like what your biases from that personal story are, like I think you will be able, I don't know, I think just like giving teachers the time and the space to actually think about who they are as individuals and like what.
Who do you think the biggest useful idiot is on this call? Who do you think the biggest useful idiot is? Is it redhead? Is it blonde woman, who's the upper left-hand corner blonde woman? Is it brunette? Or is it blue shirt? So we're going to go with redhead, blonde woman, brunette, or blue shirt. Who is the biggest useful idiot in this conversation? I definitely have thoughts about this. I'm actually just curious to know what you guys think, though. Please go ahead and chat it in. Myriad says lower right. So blue shirt. Blue shirt is lower right. What do you guys think? Blondie seems a true believer. Blue shirt. Brunette. Blonde. I think it's the blonde one. Yeah, I think it's the blonde one. I think it's the blonde one. And not the blue shirt one. I think the blue shirt one is kind of like, I don't actually think she really cares. I think she's like, I'm going to say the words I need to say. I'm going to keep this job. I know what you want me to say, kind of. She doesn't really know all of it, but she knows a lot. She knows enough. But she also has been saying things that like I said, like the biggest clue with blue shirt is like she didn't care if parents were involved. And that's a big kind of like X on her. But I think the blonde one is talking about like this personal self-reflection that she's been doing. I think she's the biggest useful idiot on the call. I think if there is a true believer, it's brunette. Brunette is a true believer. You can see it by the dead cold look in her eyes. This is an opinion. I think she's a true believer. I think she's a useful idiot. I think that she's doing this because she thinks she needs to do it to be a good person. I think blue shirt doesn't really care, to be honest. I'm not quite sure about the redhead. Maybe it's just because like the captions are going over her face, so I'm not really watching her face that closely. I'm not sure what to think about her, but those are my assessments for the other ones. And it is actually important that we think about this stuff, guys, when we're thinking about fighting back, because like the strategy that I would use with blue shirt would be very different than the strategy I would use with brunette, which would be very different than the strategy I would use with the blonde one. The blonde one can be woken up, okay? The blonde one can be woken up because she just doesn't know. She's been tricked. She doesn't know. Blue shirt probably could be brought around because she doesn't really care. She's kind of doing it for a job. Oh, can the subtitles be dragged out of the way? Hang on. Holy shit. I wish I had learned that 34 minutes ago. Now maybe we'll get an assessment of redhead. I don't know.
Biases and what strengths they're bringing to the table.
I had no idea. Thank you guys for letting me know. Thank you, Nano.
To be able to build those systems of processes and cultures of equity.
What a revelation.
Well, any last minute thoughts? Like, I can't believe we're already out of time pretty much, but like any last minute thoughts for
blue shirts, like
as
thank God
folks are
this is
gearing
over
up for the school year about what equity looks like in the classroom, or any last minute, thoughts that you had coming from your classroom experience about how to advance equity? I know we've talked about a lot.
See, the blue shirt was like,
I'm trying to think. I think just remembering that like equity means a lot of things, and that it
doesn't
always
has a very specific definition, actually.
And just being open to, I think that has been the most helpful thing, is just like being really open to feedback and being clear about like, with either co-teachers or just coworkers in general, like my intention is to make an equitable classroom that looks like X, Y, and Z, and really asking for feedback on that, and recognizing that it shows up very differently. I think it shows up differently in age, whether you're in elementary, middle, or high school. It shows up differently when you're, talking to coworkers as opposed to kids. Like it's such a large topic that it can be a little bit daunting, I think, to really like have a
That's not what equity is.
I think just remembering it shows up differently things, and
that's not what
forward is a positive step, and it's not, a you did this right or you did this wrong type of thing?
I feel like self-reflection is a thing, like a common topic that we've hit on, but definitely one of the most important, I think, is, and it's something that you do naturally as an educator all the time anyway, but making sure that
We're
you
almost done
reflect on
this one,
these
Rachel,
like
but we're going to watch
experiences and
another
these
one. Don't worry.
conversations
We're starting
and
another one after this.
like other things that you can do to create a more equitable environment, and definitely understand your students and who they are and what they bring with them, and check in with them to make sure that you're giving them all that they can to succeed.
I think we ask students to do things they feel uncomfortable with all the time. And so just like, if I was to think about like how I want to show up and like the types of conversations I want to have and the types of things I want to be thinking about, in going into a school year, I think it's just like, be okay with having that like uncomfortable conversation or like the sort of discomfort that might come with some of the self-reflection that Jamie and Yar and Anna had been sort of alluding to.
And that is equity, Leila.
Yeah.
holding yourself to what you're going to hold kids to.
Yeah.
Spot on. Well, thank you guys for such a tremendous conversation. Sorry, I have a cough in getting over a cold, so I apologize for the coughing, but thank you for a tremendous conversation and for your insights and expertise. And for those who are on the call today, thank you for your engagement.
All right, I guess that's the end of round one. I mean, this seemed really lackluster, didn't it? I'm actually really disappointed in this. I'm like, this is like this was 2 days ago. And it was like, did I really learn anything new? No. Did I really get, like, it seems like half of them don't even really understand what they're talking about. So I'm a little bit disappointed in it, if I'm honest. But maybe I won't be as disappointed in this one. So this is a different panel, and this is by the same people we just watched. You can see Blondie is right over here, but new panelists. And this is about addressing external influences and I'm not even showing it. I thought I was showing it. There it is. Addressing external influences and social emotional learning. So like I said, we got our blonde presenter right over here. We got our salesperson, our useful idiot. Well, we think she's a useful idiot. We think she's not a true believer. And by the way, guys, if you're new, it is actually a compliment. I know it might not seem like it, but it is actually a compliment that I'm calling her a useful idiot, because it basically means I think that she's trying to be a good person and that she's been tricked into believing that this is what she needs to do to be a good person, but she doesn't really understand it. So it's actually better to be a useful idiot for my definition than it is to be a true believer. So it might seem like I'm insulting her by calling her a useful idiot. That's actually a less insulting term than a true believer, just for people who might be new. All right, let's do this one.
Talking with you all today about social emotional learning, student well-being, and how to make sure you're supporting.
And please remember to mount that like button if you haven't already.
Before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick introduction, if you're first time joining us for the summer webinar series, on what we're doing with For Educators by Educators. So we are running a series of conversations about hot topics that are front and center to educators in the classroom. We are pulling in people from Riverside Insights that have had classroom experience, and they're going to get to share some of their best practices and their expertise on what they did in the classroom or the district level and how it played out for them and for their students. So this is by no means a product-specific webinar. We are just here to talk about real topics that are impacting real students and real educators on a daily basis in the classroom. So we're so excited you're joining us. So today we have a stellar lineup of Riverside Insights employees here to talk to you about addressing external influences in social emotional learning, which we know is front and center to every educator's mind right now,
Nancy,
especially coming off of 2 years of the pandemic.
Thank you for the
so in just a short moment, I'll have Ashley, Kendall, and Tina introduce themselves and share a little bit about their experience, and then we'll kick off the conversation shortly after that. But we are really excited to have these educators here with us today. And we hope that this can be a collaborative discussion as well. So please, throughout the conversation, please drop questions, comments into the chat. Would love to engage, your insights and your ideas as well, to make this as collaborative as possible. Really quickly, this is the fourth one of our series of For Educators by Educators conversations, and we have 3 more coming up in the next 3 weeks. So next week will be a topic on being creative and amplifying student potential. Then following will be building the bridge between special ed and gen ed. And then the final topic will be advancing equity in your classrooms. So if these are topics that are of interest to you, please definitely sign up and join. Even if you're unable to join them live, we will send out the recordings after. And then finally, if you have missed one of our sessions that we've had in the past couple of weeks, all of the recordings are located on the Riverside Insights website. If you go to the Riverside Insights website and click on webinars and events, you'll be able to see our previous recording.
You might not be able to see this, but so what their website says, this is K through 12 ability and achievement resources. And this is like all their webinar recordings are specifically geared towards teachers K through 12. Let's just keep that in mind as we're watching this, K through 12.
Or head to our
But I thought critical race theory wasn't taught in K through 12 schools.
YouTube channel, where you'll also be able to see some of the previous recordings. So hopefully that'll give you access to some of the conversations that we've talked about before. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see these lovely people's faces. And without further ado, would love to kick it off to our panelists today and hear who they are, where they're coming from, and their education background, and why they care about social emotional learning. Ashley, would you mind kicking it off for us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Florick. I am the Customer Experience Manager here at Riverside. So if you are reaching out to us through one of our contact channels, you're most likely speaking to a member of our team. I previously taught early childhood in a district that offered universal pre-K, and I also served as the ECE grade level chairperson. And why I care about this topic, I would say, especially in pre-K, SEL is heavily integrated into early childhood best practices, right? So concepts such as sharing, being responsive to each other's emotions, and taking time to self-reflect naturally occur in early childhood. And given what was happening,
this woman is literally talking about brainwashing children in early childhood as an essential part of their education. Social emotional learning is so much more dangerous than critical race theory, because social emotional learning is basically, so what it essentially does, it's not really about just being nice to other people. That's not what it is. It teaches kids, number one, that feelings are all that matter, that objective reality does not matter, only feelings matter. 2, it teaches them that there really is no such thing as an objective reality, which is, okay, this might sound a little complicated. I actually don't think there's such a thing as an objective reality, but that is an adult belief. That is a really, really complex, nuanced belief. Insofar as kids go, when you teach a 5-year-old there is no such thing as an objective reality, they're going to think, then I can be a unicorn, or I can be a teddy bear, or any of these other things. For them, it's going to result in a game of make-believe, which they are then going to convince themselves is true, because there is no such thing as an objective reality. So when we're talking about these things, there is a difference between an adult belief, where an adult is going to have a much more developed brain. An adult is going to have the logic reason function of your brain does not fully develop until you're in your early to mid 20s. And so as an adult, we're going to have a very much more like nuanced take on this whole whether or not there's an objective reality thing than you do when you're 5. Okay, so it's a completely different way of viewing the world. So what the result of teaching like a 5-year-old these things is going to be very different than someone talking about it like in their 30s. Okay, and that's something that we need to acknowledge. Social emotional learning is also going to teach kids to override what they're seeing with their eyes and what they're hearing with their ears in order to do the thing that they think is going to make other people feel good. This is when we get into like gender affirming whatever, gender affirming therapy, gender affirming like clinics, gender affirming things in schools. That's going to fall under social emotional learning, because we're talking about making sure people feel good about what they think in their head. So for this woman to come on and be like, we should really be doing this in elementary school. I'm sorry, what the fuck? You're literally talking about brainwashing children. That's what you're talking about.
Outside of school, for many of my students, though, I also quickly learned that I had to be responsive to what students were facing at home and adapt the day's lesson plans accordingly. And so on some days when my young students were facing external stresses, the most important achievement for that day was to help them feel that they were loved and secure in the classroom setting. And sometimes that meant not getting to 100% of planned content on a given day, but that was okay because we were able to instead focus on some of those key social emotional learning objectives. So to me, it's like a key part of the school experience.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Ashley. And I'm excited to dive into that, that later on. Because without having that solid foundation, you are unable, I don't think, to unlock a student's full potential for growth. That foundation has to be in place, especially at the early childhood level. So thank you so much for sharing that. Before I kick it over to Tina, one thing I forgot, while Tina and Kendall are introducing themselves, for any of our participants online, if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, we'd love to hear
sorry, Spirit Matter, thank you for the reminder.
What you are currently doing in your SEL programs. So
Wait.
What SEL programs you currently have,
now I know we
whether
can
you
put
have
them
an
here.
assessment or a curriculum in place, and then how you are supporting the social emotional learning in your school or in your district. So drop that in the chat, and then we'll call some of those out in just a second. But Tina, would you mind introducing yourself? I'm sorry, not yourselves.
So, my name is Christina Jordan, and I am a National Academic Advisor here at Riverside. So I work with sales and marketing on the product team to help with sales.
So National Academic Advisor, which means this woman is advising a lot of schools. This woman is directly, let's keep this in mind, this woman is directly working with school districts and advising them and giving them advice.
Sales enablement and working with customers as well. So I was a classroom teacher for 25 years at the elementary school level, and my graduate work is actually in psychology. So SEL has been a part of my professional life since the very beginning. Most of my work when I was in grad school focused on traumatic stress in students and in children and adolescents. And so I've sort of been diving into this topic for a really long time. Like Ashley said,
Can I just tell you guys, I've given so many training webinars like this. I have done hundreds of fucking webinars just like this. And so because of that, it is extremely easy for me to see through the bullshit that these people are pimping on this webinar. This woman does she's literally making stuff up. She's making stuff up. She's talking about things that she's saying, oh, this has been involved in my professional life since the beginning. No, that's not real. She's just saying that for the webinar. That's not real. I'm going to bet I'm expressing an opinion. I don't know that for sure. I don't know this woman. I've never met her, but based on the hundreds of webinars that I've done like this and have been involved with on stuff like this, that's not fucking real. And you always need to keep that in mind when you're watching webinars like this. It's like, I'm not going to say there's no truth to it because there probably is truth to it. There's probably it's like a nugget of truth covered in a mound of bullshit. That's what these things usually amount to.
I really think that this is something that as educators we've always woven into our curriculum, making sure that our students have the emotional strength and capability to be flexible, to be kind, to be welcoming. All of those things are just good practices as a human, right? So it's always been part of my educational path. I worked in an area where my students were dealing with some pretty big social challenges. Most of my students were living below the poverty level. A lot of my students were coming from refugee camps in other parts of the world. So they had a lot of real life issues that they were dealing with. So like Ashley said, sometimes we had to pivot, sometimes we had to be flexible, sometimes all we did was address social emotional well-being, and it was part of our school culture to make sure that not only our students but our staff felt connected and felt like they had the resources they needed to be strong individuals.
Thank you so much, Tina. Really excited to, get some of your expertise and best practices shortly. And then finally, Kendall.
Hi, I'm Kendall. I'm from the Twin Cities area. I'm a customer success manager with Riverside, and I work with Minnesota, Illinois, and Iowa, so Midwest gang, and I'm really excited to be here. I used to be a special education resource teacher in the Minneapolis area. I taught for 4 years with kindergarten, first and second grade students in a resource setting, setting 1 and 2, which means that all of my students spent less than half essentially of their day in my classroom, no more than that. And so, I also want to recognize the privilege that I had as a special education teacher to really have a lot of time to work one-on-one with students on their SEL needs. And this is important to me because so many times I found myself, when I didn't focus on SEL with my kids, when I had them in that small group setting, then I found myself putting out a lot of fires and being reactive to their needs rather than fireproofing them and being, proactive. And just as it's the job of all teachers to prepare our students to go out into the world and, have skills in all areas, a huge part of my job was to prepare my students to be able to enter the general education setting and have the SEL tools that they needed in order to be successful there. So I hope that can be a helpful perspective too, as we're talking about this and how SEL is so important for them to be successful even academically too in their classroom.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful, Kendall, because I was a general education teacher for kindergarten, not first grade, kindergarten, 4th and 5th grade. And my school did not have SEL in place. And it was detrimental to them, both emotionally, but also academically. And so I'm really excited to kind of hear what you all are able to do in the classroom and what, I think we should have done in my schools, the schools I taught at, to be able to prepare students for more long-term success. So really thrilled to have the 3 of you here today to share some of your experiences. Before we get started with further discussions, we had a couple folks drop in what they're currently using and dropped in a note to say hi. So Leela said she was a school psychologist from New York. Leela, we're so excited to have you join us today. Barbara said that she uses PATHs daily in the classrooms, which is great program. And Barbara, thank you for sharing that. We're excited to hopefully get to pick some of your best practices as well later on. And then Eleanor shared that she works in early at Head Start and does the ages and stages social emotional screening for all the children. So those are some of the
Wait. Hang on. I gotta show you guys something. Okay, this is not what I expected to see. Okay, I just turned on Twitter. I probably shouldn't have. Have you guys seen Ezra Miller lately? Look what just came up on my Twitter. Look what just came up. What the fuck is Ezra Miller doing? Who the fuck is that? What is going on? Who is that? I'm so confused. I'm so confused. What the fuck is going on? Hang on. Let me just see what this is. Okay, you guys are seeing I have 18,000 browser windows open. The Flash starring Ezra Miller still on track despite actors' reason. Is that really Ezra Miller? Hang on. Oh, that's not showing me. I just want to see who the fuck. Oh, God, Fox News, why does your website suck? Is that really Ezra Miller? That's crazy, yo. That's crazy. Hang on. Tom Cruise. Okay, that doesn't even relate to the article. If that is fucking Ezra Miller. Holy shit. I mean, it's a nice jacket. You have to give him that. It's a good fur jacket. It's a good jacket. Wow. I'm getting way too old for this. I feel like, does anyone else, okay, I don't know how old everyone is in the chat. Does everyone else feel like you're kind of like, here's what I feel like right now. I feel like I've hit that age when my parents started saying to me, "You kids with your newfangled music and your such and such muckety muck." That's what I feel like. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I have no idea who most of these people even are. And then when I see them, they look crazy. Is this like a normal thing? I can't even. I can't. All right. Sorry. I just had to show you guys that because I thought you would appreciate it. All right. Here we go.
Programs that folks have in place currently. Crystal said she's a second step at K-8 schools, so it sounds like there is a wide variety of programs and practices in place, which is fantastic. And I'm so grateful that we're starting to get to a point where we are actually thinking about how to support students on a daily basis in the school setting, and thinking about how to understand what their specific social emotional needs are and how to differentiate instruction accordingly. So I think the first thing that I'm really curious to talk to you all about is, what does SEL even mean? This is a word that has gotten thrown around, especially since the start of COVID.
Yes. What does
and
SEL mean?
I
That's
think
a good
so many
question.
different understandings of what social emotional learning means and student well-being means. And so we'd love to get your perspectives. Like, what does this mean, and what are we even trying to do with SEL? Whoever wants to kick it off first.
Yeah, I can start. I just, you know,
You notice that we're gonna call her brunette. Like we're gonna call her Glasses because she's the only one wearing glasses. You notice that Glasses was like earlier. She was like, well, you know, I studied psychology for my graduate degree, and really, social emotional learning has always been at the forefront of what I've been doing professionally. But when Blondie asks, "What is the definition of social emotional learning?" Look at that face. Look at that face. That's how you know. Listen, guys. Here are the things that we always need to be paying attention to. Or at least here are the things that I pay attention to. I pay very close attention to the language people use. I pay very close attention to the word choice. I'm always asking myself, why did they choose that specific word choice when they probably could have chosen any number of other ways to articulate the same concept? Why did they choose that? What is influencing them around them to choose that specific word choice? You want to pay very close attention to the language. You want to pay very close attention to the body language. Do they seem open and happy, or do they seem closed off and angry? This is all going to give you so much more information than if you're just listening to what they're saying. You actually want to watch their reactions, and you want to listen to the specific language that they're using over and over and over and over again. And that's going to tell you whether or not they're a true believer or a useful idiot, or they just don't know what they're talking about at all. And they're just like, I just need to get through this webinar because my boss told me I had to do it. These are all different categories of person. And we need to treat each of these categories of person as different for our purposes. Also, it's time for me to drink another beer.
Adults,
almost.
Right, and how
holy
when we are
shit!
dysregulated as adults.
Incognito, are you shitting me? The jury just ruled that Alex Jones has to pay $45 million. I'm going to be honest. Okay, this might be unpopular. I think that Alex Jones was incredibly irresponsible with what he did. I do. I'm sorry. I know that Alex Jones can be right. I know that. Yeah, plus that other so Alex Jones is basically out like $50 million. Listen, I think that Alex Jones was incredibly fucking irresponsible with what he did. I'm not sure I agree with the way this trial has gone and the way the whole thing is played out, but I do think that Alex Jones was incredibly irresponsible with what he did. Incredibly irresponsible. Now, that's not to say that I necessarily think that he's wrong on everything. I don't. But I think he was incredibly irresponsible with what he did. I'm sorry. I just do. I think a lot of content creators are incredibly, incredibly irresponsible. I think that I used to be incredibly irresponsible when I was just starting out. I really try to be responsible. I really, really do try to present a nuanced take. I don't say I'm sure about something unless I'm sure about it. And I really, really, really think that Alex Jones behaved incredibly irresponsibly about that. I really do. Well, yeah, and I mean also like his attorneys, dude, like can you imagine like Alex Jones's attorneys sent a copy of all of Alex Jones's text messages and emails to the opposing team? What the fuck? The right, man. The right. Like, they keep screwing up over and over and over again unnecessarily. All right, guys, I need another beer before we continue. Hang on. And since most of you voted, I think the second choice one was the oh, I'm cringe, huh? I'm cringe. All right. Well, you don't need to be here anymore. Goodbye. God, I am going for the sour beer. I'm going for the Blackberry Sour with the lactose. So this is going to be Blanco berries. This is going to be our Willy Wonka beer. And this is a sour ale with blackberries, mangoes, and lactose. Let's see if this is a pretty beer. I bet it's going to be. Oh, yeah, I wonder if there was Sext on there. Oh, my God. No, I'm going with this sour. This was the second runner-up. All right, let's see. So you can see it's light, like the lightness of it, that's the lactose. The lactose makes it like, you can also see the lactose. You guys see that? It's like rummaging around. The lightness is from the lactose. Yes, it is. Listen, Spirit Matter, that Ambrosia beer that I had last week was fucking delicious. You're right, this is another Johnny Depp character. Johnny Depp characters apparently make the best beer. Let's see. I like it. I think it's yep, there is lactose in that. There is blackberries and mangoes and lactose. The lactose is going to make it a little thicker. And that's why lactose sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. Lactose, though, it has a weird smell. I don't like the smell of it. I really dislike the smell of it. It can make things taste good, but I really dislike the smell of it. And like the aroma of it is like part of the joy of drinking beer is that it can smell really good. It's not bad. Not a bad beer. Yep, all the lawyers saw Alex Jones's dick. That's probably true. We guys, come on, we know that's true. Come on. You know Alex Jones had pictures of his dick on his phone. You know he did. All right, let's continue.
We don't want to do our chores either. We don't want to do what we need to do. It's hard to go to work if we're feeling emotional or anxious or stressed. And I really think there's a clear connect with kids in that way too, where when they're not feeling calm, when they're not feeling safe or they're not feeling heard, it's a lot harder for them to learn. So I think, as we are in a world now where there's a lot more stressors than there ever has been before, I think we're starting to realize that we need to address emotional needs before academic needs can be touched. So
we're addressing emotional needs before academic needs? No. That is not your fucking job. That is not your fucking job. You are you are not a public school teacher anymore. You are these people are literally training public school teachers that it is their job to address the emotional needs of children before they teach them how to read and write and do math. No. That is not your job. Your job is to teach them how to read, how to write, and how to do math. You are not their parent. They are not your children. Your job is to teach them how to read, how to write, and how to do math, not to take care of their feelings. Yes, exactly, spirit matter, exactly. They are practice. This is what social emotional learning is. They are practicing psychology without a license. Sin says social workers instead of educational worker. Yes. Yes. Now listen, guys, I'm not a clinician. I am not clinically licensed as a psychologist. I do industrial organizational psychology. That is a completely different thing. The reason I bring this up is that I am not allowed to do what these people are doing. I'm not allowed to do it. I do not practice clinical psychology. I don't work with people to help with their feelings, okay? Every once in a while I do coaching, which can be kind of about feelings, but I'm not doing the work of a clinical psychologist. These people are actively telling teachers who are not trained in any way that their job is to be a psychologist, which it is not. It is not at all.
So that's kind of where I go.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, if a student hasn't had any food since the prior school day or hasn't been able to get a full night's sleep due to factors outside of school, that's going to take a toll on not just their physical well-being, but also their emotional well-being and how they present in the classroom. So staying tuned into those variables is going to be important just as we understand the full picture of a student, right? And specifically in pre-K, the SEL objectives that we were trying to achieve were helping
Pre-K,
students
4 years
to
old.
learn to manage
4.
their emotions and their actions and help them to establish and maintain positive relationships, both with their classmates and with teachers and adults.
Why are pre-kindergarten teachers, pre-K, 4 years old, talking to children about emotions? Why aren't they talking to their parents? Why is it the job of teachers to counsel 4-year-olds about emotions when they have had no training as psychologists at all? Probably haven't had training in developmental psychology. Probably have no clinical work. Probably have had no supervision. Why is it their job? This is how you end up with fucked up kids. Right here.
And effectively participate in group settings. And so those were foundational items to set them up for success with regards to collaborating with others and learning how to appropriately express themselves. So in the context of, again, that early childhood classroom, that was ultimately the goal we were trying to achieve.
Well, and also I think beyond just that foundational piece, and somebody mentioned this earlier, but our part of our job as educators is to make sure that we are helping students become contributing members of society, right? At post high school graduation. So no matter what they choose to do out in the world as they are young adults, we need to help guide them so that they can contribute and function in society. And part of that is getting along with others, having emotional awareness, having empathy for other people around you, and just understanding that not everybody has to be exactly the same, and accepting each other's differences and embracing each other's strengths, and all of those things that we just need to do to get along as a society. And so, whereas there is a lot of formal SEL curriculum out there, as I mentioned earlier, it's just part of what we've always done as educators, weaving that into our classroom. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal block of time that we spend. It may be just as simple as having a morning meeting with your class and kids sharing a few things or celebrating something that somebody had a success in over the week, whether it was something small or big, or all of those things aid in the social emotional development us as community members in our schools and our larger communities outside of the school.
I think that's such a good. Oh, go ahead, Kendall. I'm sorry.
It makes me think about how Tina's totally preaching to the choir, and that we all know how important it is. We have curriculums that we can use. It's awesome. But at the end of the day, it's not always about following a lesson plan. It's modeling. It's helping them reframe. It's taking a few minutes to talk. Because I just remember as a teacher being asked, what curriculum do you use? And sometimes when I was working with a group of kids with really diverse needs, a curriculum or a lesson wouldn't meet their needs. And sometimes I just needed to come down to their level and discuss and model, like Tina was saying. Sometimes it's not as simple as here's the answer.
Yeah. I think those are such good points, because I think so often in the classroom we get focused on the next benchmark assessment or the next score or getting your child to the next grade. And in reality, I think, Tina, what you said about we are at our core,
you're
as
right,
educators,
James. They haven't said what it is. They haven't defined it. You're absolutely
citizens
correct.
of the world. And whether that means that they're on a college track or they're on a career track or they're somewhere in between, we are preparing them to be able to make an income for themselves down the road. And so that, like, thinking about that has really helped me reframe like what SEL means. That it's, yes, it's so important to make sure that kids have the food the food that they need and the clothes that they need and the environment at home that they need. But there's also a huge component that's about teaching students to have confidence in themselves, teaching them to understand their strengths, teaching them to self-regulate their emotions and be able to actually engage in interpersonal relationships with others. And those are such like key components. Like every action in the classroom contributes or doesn't contribute to supporting students developing into those global citizens. I think that's such a good point. So how, I think, and we were starting to touch on this, there are the formal curriculums that so many schools have in place now, which is fantastic. What are some best practices that you all use to infuse this into throughout the day? We know that teachers, especially in general education, are limited by time and resources to get through all of the curriculum in an hour or in the school day. How do you infuse some of these SEL practices so that your students are getting the touch points and the practices that they need in order to develop some of these skills? What did y'all do in the classroom?
Yeah, so for me, while some lessons would be dedicated to social emotional learning objectives through means like read alouds and circle time, for the most part, I viewed SEL as something that we addressed throughout the entire school day, exactly like what you're saying. And so a lot of our conversations would be around making responsible decisions or safe choices and understanding how our actions were impacting those around us. So for students who either needed this quiet time away from others or who needed time to cool off after a heated interaction with another student, in my classroom, I actually had a dedicated reflection center, and it was off to the side, kind of like by where my desk was, but also not too close to my desk. So they actually had some, time alone. I had sensory items there that could appeal to a variety of senses, like tubes filled with water and glitter, Play-Doh, but also had visual cues that students could point to in order to effectively describe their emotions when I would check in with them. So, there'd be like an angry face and they could just point to that if they couldn't articulate how they were feeling at the time, especially because they were 4 and 5 years old. So they were just learning some of that vocabulary too. And I had a tattle teddy as a form of self-regulation. So it was like teddy bear pinned to the wall, like a 2D printout teddy bear pinned to the wall. And students could go tell Tattle Teddy in the reflection center what was upsetting them instead of lashing out at others, right? And I actually had a student go tell on me to Tattle Teddy during one of my observations because I didn't call on him right away during circle time, but he was able to take whatever time he needed to cool off and was able to rejoin his designated spot around the circle when he was ready. So those were just some ways that we incorporated it separate from like formal lesson plans.
I love that, actually, because those are skills, like those are strategies that even as an adult you can incorporate on a daily basis. Like those are strategies that will be lifelong, that will help that student for life.
No, it is not a lifelong skill to go and talk to a printed teddy bear on a wall to tell that teddy bear why you're upset. That is not a practical, actionable, lifelong skill. Now, Where I do actually think that that wasn't like the worst exercise at all for like a 5-year-old to go. Like, it's actually kind of an ingenious exercise, to be honest, because like the teachers can basically do whatever they want, and then they tell the kids who don't know any better, go complain to the printed teddy bear on the wall. That's actually kind of genius. However, that's not a lifelong skill. You can't always go and complain to the printed teddy bear at the wall. Sometimes you need to learn emotional regulation. But insofar as kindergarten goes, I actually don't think that's bad. I think that's kind of a genius move. I really do. Like, I'm gonna start telling everyone that's mad at me, go print out a tattle teddy, and tape it to the wall, and go tell. This is what I'm gonna tell the horde on Twitter. I'm gonna like get an image of a teddy bear printed out and taped to a wall, and I'm gonna be like, go pour your feelings out to the teddy. I don't need to hear about it. I don't need to hear about your feelings. Go talk to the teddy bear taped to the wall. Nothing could go wrong with this plan.
What great ideas.
We all need a tattle teddy, right?
We all need a tattle teddy. Put it right here next to me.
That's not healthy for adults.
My students were a little bit older than Ashley's. The majority of my teaching time, I spent in like 4th and 5th and 6th grade. So I always started out my year with
Patrick,
giving
this
students
is an excellent point. Isn't a journal the grown-up version of a tattle teddy? That's a great point. Yes, I think that is a good version of it. Yeah, talk to the hand. I used to have t-shirts that said talk to the hand.
ownership on what our classroom
Every
rules were
journalist
be
needs
and,
a tattle
and what they
teddy.
expected from themselves and others. And we took really the whole first week of school to go through that. So what did they think was important to make our classroom feel safe, to run properly, and things like, you know, you had to be able to raise your hand and say something without somebody criticizing you, or, you know, you had to show respect and things like that. And so we would, I would give the students some ownership on what the classroom rules were. At my school too, we also, we implemented a PBIS structure, positive behavior intervention. And we had, our school mascot was the bear. And BEAR stood for belonging, empathy, academics, and responsibility. So the school really, as a whole community, focused on those things. And we, as a school, every month, like this month, we're talking about belonging. And if the principal would stop our students in the hall, or me as the teacher, and say, this month we're working on belonging, or this month we're working on empathy, what does that mean? The student would have to say, this is what it means. And then the principal would go a step farther and say, what does it look like when you see somebody showing empathy? What does that sound like? Have you seen anybody in the building this week showing empathy? Have you shown empathy to anybody? So really drove those values home to the students. So as a school community, and outside of the school community as well, we shared that with the parents and asked students to, you know, show those values outside of school and have parents help model that at home. So those were just ways as a community we did that. I also would do what we called roses and thorns in my—
Okay, question that has nothing to do with anything that we're watching right now, but I'm just curious. Has anyone watched the documentary on Netflix about Woodstock 99? Let me know if you have, and let me know if it's worth watching, because I'm seriously thinking about watching it later. So let me know. Yeah, you're probably right, Bot. They probably do have a voodoo doll of me. In fact, I should probably, if I was smart, I would probably make a voodoo doll of myself and sell it to them. Because apparently they like buying really crudely drawn pictures of me and giving boys who don't need money for a computer because they just got a large cash payment from their government, and giving boys money for those crudely drawn images. They like that, so maybe I should just sell them a voodoo doll.
My classroom. And so when we would have our beginning or end of the day, I would say, you know, does anybody have any roses they want to share today? Like something positive. And then, you know, did anybody have any thorns? And it could be something super small, or it could
It's
be a
not
big deal.
art.
And I also let kids.
It's not art. He used to make good art. He used to make legitimately good art. Back in the day. Back in the day when I was mentoring him, he made good art. And now he makes crayon scribblings. It's so sad. It's so effing sad. Okay. I hadn't thought. Is that on Tom J? Where is that documentary? Where is it? See, I don't watch documentaries anymore unless I have a recommendation from someone because I think it might be woke. Let me know where that is. Anyway, back to the show.
Like put in a box anonymously because you know, not everybody's comfortable sharing that, and so they could just, I could read a rose that happened to somebody or a thorn that they maybe needed help with or advice or
Cool.
just something
Thanks,
that they
Tom
wanted
J.
to say was
Appreciate
happening. So all of those things just sort of helped. But for me, giving the students some ownership, and then they would really take each other to task. They would say, you know, we agreed that you would do this in the class and you're not doing that now. And so it sort of took the policing away from me, and they sort of helped each other.
So she wanted the children to do her job.
That's fantastic, because it's also teaching students to be able to confront and give feedback to their fellow peers if they're, you know, and hold each other accountable, but in a supportive and safe and loving way. I love that, Tina. Kendall, what about what practices did you have in like a special education setting that you think would be applicable to more of a general education setting?
Yeah, in my setting, a lot of our SEL work focused on social skills and self-regulation, and self-regulation being the biggest one. And oftentimes, the way that you are able to very obviously see a need for self-regulation work is through student behavior. But that can, of course, be like so subjective, and you know, you can't handle all behavior in the same way. So something that was really important to me, first of all, was taking care of my own well-being. Oftentimes, I really had to hold space for some really big feelings and really big traumas from my students. And that was significantly harder to do on days where I hadn't taken time for myself. You know,
she's a true believer. True believer right here. True believer. Useful idiot. Useful idiot. Glasses is a useful idiot. I think this woman, brunette, is a useful idiot as well. I think that this upper left-hand corner woman is the only true believer on the call. Let me know if you disagree in the comments.
Important for me to remember as a teacher that my needs are important. I know we all want to stay late. I know we all want to come in early, but at the end of the day, you need to take care of yourself. So that was a really big thing for me that I think everyone needs to take time for. And then also, with my students, I use something called collaborative and proactive solutions, which was born out of the idea that every behavior can be explained by an unlearned skill. So it was really taking a lot of one-on-one time with students to say, okay, here's the problem. The problem is every time we start our writing assignment in Gen Ed, you walk to the back of the classroom and start pacing. And kind of turning it to the student and saying, you know, this is key, can you help me understand why that's what you do at that time? And giving the kid some time to think about why they're having that experience. And for this student I'm thinking of, it was because his desk was a mess and he could never find his writing notebook. So he didn't want to even touch it. It was so overwhelming to him. So he would just withdraw. So a lot of my time was spent, you know, helping the students solve their own regulation struggles, and then guiding them through how can they articulate that to their gen ed teachers. I'm sorry if this is kind of long-winded, but we had a behavior dean at my school who would get called in when students were having a hard time in general education. And what we found is, you know, that's a great Band-Aid. It's a great temporary solution, but with the kid who does that same behavior every single day, it's kind of just putting out the fire and putting out the fire. So something that we tried was, instead of having the behavior dean come and take the kid out and talk about a problem they weren't even there to witness, we would have the behavior dean come in and cover the class for 5 minutes while the teacher stepped out with a student and did that collaborative proactive solution model. Even if it didn't get resolved there, it was like, oh my gosh, I get this one-on-one time with my teacher, just 5 minutes. I know that you're gonna say that could happen all day long, you know, I'll always be pulled out. But there's so much more to the kid to be heard and seen by their classroom teacher, and it was less punitive. So
that is huge, because I think core to all of this, like listening to all of your practices that you shared, is building a culture of trust for your students. And I think that it's so easy, specifically as we're trying to help grow students.
By the way, I want to say, I don't actually think that everything they do in regards to social emotional learning is bad. And this is what makes it so nefarious, because there are legitimately good things that they do. I don't think that tattle teddy thing is a bad idea. I just don't. I'm sorry. I think it's pretty much harmless. I think that teaching kids how to, regulate their emotions is probably a good thing, but it can also be perverted very quickly to be used in ways that are completely unintended. But this is why we need to keep a really close eye on social emotional learning, because some of the things they do are perfectly fine and actually probably beneficial, but it's so easy for it to cross the line into something that goes completely off the rails.
Help students grow academically and provide them with the academic resources they need, to forget that not all students may feel the trust and the safety to be able to learn how to self-regulate, or be able to learn how to gain confidence, or be able to try something new and fail. And I think that, like, those key practices, I had a colleague one time, and I thought this was a brilliant idea, who had, I think this was a fifth grade classroom, who had journals for all of her students, and she would give them time to journal throughout the day, and then she would read them and respond. And it took a lot of work on her end to just like be able to even write like a quick note, but it created this confidential trust between every student and the teacher, so that they could talk about things that were really on their mind, or share something that they were struggling with. And knew that they had a safe place to turn to.
I don't like this idea. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I do not like the idea of a 5-year-old having a confidential journal with their teacher, or a 6-year-old, or a 7-year-old, or an 8-year-old, or a 9-year-old, or a 10-year-old. I don't like that idea. It's a bad idea. Why does a child need a confidential journal with an adult that is not their parent? Listen, we had these things when I was young. They were called fucking diaries. You got a diary, it had a lock on it. You had a key for that lock. You could probably break the lock if you were really motivated. But you had a fucking diary. It had a lock on it. You wrote in the diary, you said, "Dear diary, here's what I went through today." And then you locked it and you left it in your room and no one read it. Having a diary that you only communicate with another adult that is not your parent, or not another adult, an adult. If you're like a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid and you have a diary that is only read by an adult that is not your parent, that is a problem. That's creepy. Most kids don't even want their parents reading their diaries. Why are you giving it to the teacher? That's creepy as fuck. I'm sorry. That is so creepy. Do you know how much bullshit I wrote in my diaries growing up? And yes, I did have diaries. I did. I was one of those kids. I did. But most of it was like feelings or fantasy, or things that were hyperbolic compared to what actually happened. Because you're a kid. That's what kids do. They think that everything is the end of the world. They think everything is the most important thing that's ever happened. And then you grow up and you realize that it's not. Because you have life experience, and with life experience comes wisdom. That's a bad idea. A private fucking diary that you're only giving to your teachers? Holy shit.
And I think those are like that element of trust is a key foundation for any sort of growth, whether it's social emotional learning or academic growth in the classroom.
I think sometimes students don't know that they can ask for certain types of help too, or at least that was my experience. A student with the messy writing desk, he was like, "Well, I don't have time to clean out my desk." And I said, "Well, why don't you ask the teacher if you can clean out your desk during writing time. And he said, well, then I wouldn't be writing. I said,
You
you're
know,
not writing anyway.
Hang on. Vincent is asking a great question. Vincent, I wonder what these ladies would think if a male teacher proposed this diary concept, especially with young girls. That seems wrong to me. It also seems wrong with, I mean, let's be honest, guys, like most of the teachers who get arrested for having sex with their students are women. Most of the teachers who get arrested for this shit are women. They're not men. And they're having sex with youngish men that they shouldn't be having sex with. It's a bad idea, man. It's a bad idea.
You're pacing, so just ask. And he asked his teacher, can I clean it out and organize it during writing? And she said yes. And then he was able to participate from that point on. So sometimes they need to be told, you can ask for help, and this is what it sounds like to ask for help, and this is what it, you know, and with that journaling practice, I just imagine that would make them feel so seen.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really good question come, a couple comments have come in the chat that I'd love to share out. Crystal said that she also had a tattle monster in her class, which I love. She also joined that. That was a great. But we had a question come in about, and I think this kind of ties into some of the things that we've started to bring up, but like, how do you help students that have specific learning needs or specific, you know, cultural differences, whether they're from an ESL background or something like that, or, you know, maybe a student with an IEP that has different learning needs. Like, how do you support them with developing those social emotional skills in a special ed setting, but then also within the context of a larger classroom?
Yeah, it's a good question. We always did kind of like a needs assessment. So I would give, there's a form for it, but you can do it kind of informally too. I want you to try to think about what you're seeing and what it could mean. So a lot of times we have this thing in special ed, like what came first, the learning difficulty or the behavior. So are you seeing the behavior in the classroom because they have a learning difficulty and they are acting in a way to remove themselves from having to do the activity that's hard? Or has their behavior gotten in the way of their learning? They don't have a learning difficulty, they just have missed so much. And now it's hard because of that reason. So I think if you can kind of get to the root of why, you know, is this behavior happening because they are trying to escape, or are they trying to gain something? It kind of goes, I'm kind of getting into like function of behavior, but I think you talk to the student. I think you talk to the student and you really try to find out.
It is rather ironic to me that these people who seem to think they're psychologists when it comes to children have so little self-reflection about themselves. So they're being deeply reflective about, like, why is the child behaving this way? Why is the child doing these things? What does the child really want? What does the child really need? In some cases, they're right. In some cases, they're wrong. But they are not applying that same type of self-reflection onto themselves.
You know, you say, I notice this behavior is happening. It worries me because it affects you in this way or your classmates in this way. And can you help me understand what that might be about? That is really hard though, to know, you know, is it a learning deficit that's making them shut down, or is it an external influence, you know?
And with ESL students, I think we take it, sorry, I'm so sorry. I think we need to take it one step further, even with, is it a learning issue, a behavior issue, or is it a language? Is it a lack of confidence with language? And I think that differentiator with specifically with EL students is, you know, how do we identify whether they need language support or learning support?
Well, and I also think Kendall mentioned, you know, talk to the student. I know that I had students, I'm thinking about two of my students actually, that it wasn't an academic issue, but they were so disruptive in my classroom. And finally, I was just like, what can I do? And this one young lady said to me, Mrs. Jordan, I can't sit for as long as I need to sit. I just can't. And I looked at the seating chart in my classroom and she was like up by the front of the room. And so I said, well, if I move you to the back of the room, can you still see the board? Yes. I said, great, let's move you to the back of the room. When you need to stand, you can stand. So she, for the whole year, wanted to be in the back of the room. She would stand up, she would rock back and forth, she would kick her, like, but she was in the back of the room and she was fully engaged. When I asked her questions, she was listening to what I was doing. She needed to move. And her need to move was disrupting my whole class, but it was disrupting it because I had her like in the middle of the classroom.
And they are so much more adaptable than we think, the other kids.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and you know, I remember visiting my own children's classrooms once, and there was a little boy who just blurted out like in the middle all the time. He had Tourette's, and not all the parents were looking around, and the kids were like, it's just Max.
Yeah.
Like they totally was not even a thing. But I also used to let my students give me like little silent signals too, you know, and I would let them make it up. And it couldn't be like flailing their arms or something, but just something like, you know, this, or give me a 5 in the air or something. And when I noticed that, that meant that they needed a break, or they need whatever they needed with that signal. And they just, I would connect with them and like give them a nod, and then they could take care of whatever they needed to. And it didn't have to be anybody else's business, but I saw the signal, and then they could do what they needed to do.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what you both said, I think part of SEL is adapting the physical environment and, you know, putting familiar things around like the walls or in the classroom library that reflect the lived experiences of our students, right? So, you know, having their
lived
family structure
experiences,
reflected
ding, ding,
in
ding,
books,
ding,
or,
ding.
you know, in early childhood, we'd have the pictures of families up on the walls anyway to help it feel like a safe space. But, you know, just, I think that highlights the importance of just being really tuned in, like you all are saying, to who our students are as people and being responsive to that. And, you know, it probably will look a little bit different year over year because you're going to have different students, but adapting the physical environment just the same that we do with some of these, you know, emotional learning.
I have mixed feelings about this because I do actually agree with Chris B here. I would have done much better in class had I been able to stand in the back. Like I have a standing desk at home. If you don't have a standing desk, they're really fucking great. I don't use my standing desk enough. I probably should use my standing desk more. But like, so like, I actually think that that's a good accommodation. But at the same time, at what point are people going to learn that you don't always get what you want? And sometimes you need to go into working environments and you need to do things you don't want to do, and you're not always going to be accommodated. And that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. I don't know.
Learning concepts.
And don't be afraid, like Tina was talking about doing, don't be afraid to give something different to one student that the other student doesn't get. Because I would say all the time to my students, were like, well, how come he's allowed to sit on a wobble chair and I have to sit on a stationary chair? And I'd say everyone gets what they need, you know, and you can explain that to kids too and say, you focus just fine without that. And I do want to also just say, for anyone that was curious about that needs assessment, or that collaborative, proactive problem solving model, there's a really good book called Lost at School. And it's all about the troublemakers, right? The kids that get labeled as the troublemakers, like Tina was saying, that you just can't figure out, and you're like, what do you need? And the book talks about, it has a lot of stories, but it also has a lot of.
I was a troublemaker in school because I was effing bored. Because I was bored. Because I was always, okay, I don't mean to toot my own horn. Like, I was always ahead of the people in my class. And I was always like, I was that kid that like, I would bring my own books into the class and just read my own books while they were like learning and doing other stuff because I had already finished the homework assignment 15 fucking minutes ago. So I was like, most of the troublemakers in school are effing bored because you're coddling every other student in class and you're giving the problem students much more attention than you're giving the ones who like are more advanced, and they're fucking bored. This is not complex to figure out. They're bored.
Practical applications for how you do what Tina did, which is how you get to the bottom of the problem and reach those individuals. So just wanted to share that.
No, I'm so glad. Thank you, Kendall. I'm going to have to read that one. I haven't read that one yet.
It's really good.
Yeah, and it's just, it's you know, I've been thinking a lot as I'm listening to y'all talk about how, as an educator, I feel like we know students scores and standards like the back of our standards mastery, like the back of our hands. Like we can tell you, Adrian doesn't know these standards, Susie doesn't know these standards, Louisa doesn't know these standards, and to be able, I'm almost thinking like to flip our mentality in the classroom of focusing first, like being able to tell you what every student needs from a social emotional perspective, and trusting that the academic.
I once got a detention for reading too much. I got a detention and I got all my books taken away, and I was still getting A's in the class without even trying. School is such bullshit. It really is. It really is.
Growth will follow, because I think that you don't like there are so many good teachers out there, and I think we can trust the lessons and a lot of the academic curriculum and the growth measures and benchmarks that we have in place. But until we have that solid foundation of practices that create cultures where students feel okay to learn those social emotional skills, we're never going to see that academic growth that we want to see.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, and I like to relate it to, like adults, right? Like if we're experiencing a traumatic situation or, experiencing a lot of different just inputs in general, it's probably could be hard for even us to retain information. So if students are coming to our classrooms with a lot of these different, again, inputs affecting their ability to be fully present, then they're not going to retain any of that material. So, you could teach the full, the full content that's planned for the day, but if the student isn't mentally and physically able to be fully there, then, we're not really promoting that growth, right? Like I think what you just said is so foundational to everything else that we do. So.
Well, and I also just want to say that I am so happy as an educator that this is becoming more like mainstream and forefront. I mean, I think for sure Kendall and I came from big urban districts. And like I said, most of my students were living below the poverty level. And so all of those things were things that I, as an educator, got training in because my students needed it. And the majority of our population were dealing with bigger than life problems sometimes. But that doesn't mean that if you're in a suburban district, that stuff isn't still needed. And I think sometimes we assume that because these students are coming from, families that are apparently stable and they're financially sound and all of those things, that everything's okay. But it's not always, and it's not always stuff that's related to those bigger social problems. Like I'm the mom of a dyslexic child, and she went to a very high achieving suburban school district, right? For her to say, I need help when she was in that environment was a really, really scary thing for her and caused some emotional distress. So teaching her and working with her teachers on how to help her be confident in saying, I need help, and to advocate for herself in that setting was something that like her teachers didn't always think about, because you just assume, well, our population just doesn't need that. Well, yes, everybody needs that. We all do as humans. And I think if the past few years with COVID taught us anything, it's that we weren't all equipped to deal with some of that. And we can't just assume that everybody's okay. Again, it's just good skills for life.
Mm-hmm. The advocacy part is so big, Tina, because I think what I saw, I also taught in very low income urban districts, and my kids didn't know how to advocate for themselves.
Your
and
kids.
Then where they got to college or post-secondary education, and they struggled because like when I think about going into college or when classes.
Listen, dude. If kids are getting to college and struggling, that's because you fucking sucked as a teacher. I'm sorry. I really struggled in college. The first year of college was so fucking hard for me. And that's because I went to a shitty rural school for elementary school, middle school, and high school. A shitty, underfunded rural school with teachers who didn't really give a fuck, which is probably why I was bored all the time, because I was smarter than most of the people in that school. No offense to anyone I went to school with, but that was the fucking truth. And then I got into Boston University, which is not like a slacker school. And I'm so glad I went to BU. I loved my time at BU. I wouldn't go there today because today it's the home of Ibram X. Kendi, and I'm a little bit sad about that. But like, I fucking loved my time at Boston University. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. But it was so hard the first year. It was so hard. I struggled so much because I went to a shitty school with shitty teachers. And so if you have kids struggling, it's because you failed them. Sorry, said it.
When I was having a hard time academically, I was at, tutoring or at office hours and advocated for what I needed from that professor. But so many of the kids that I taught had never experienced an opportunity to actually learn how to articulate what they needed and advocate for it. And it was so painful to watch them really struggle down the road because they had missed that opportunity of gaining those skills. One question
real quick, in pre-K, one of the objectives is actually learning to independently brush your teeth, right? To me, this is also a key, we've all said, foundational part of.
Why are you teaching kids to brush their teeth in pre-kindergarten? Why aren't parents teaching that before they get to school? That doesn't seem like something you learn in pre-K to me. Am I wrong about that? Do these kids not brush their teeth at all before they're 4? Am I wrong? I don't have kids. I don't know. I mean, maybe most parents don't let their kids brush their teeth at all until they go to school and learn how to brush their teeth. Am I wrong?
That development. I feel like almost everything does hinge on, having that safe space, that secure, social emotional baseline from.
You think you need a safe space in school to learn how to brush your teeth? Are you fucking shitting me? Wow.
Much to be able to layer on every other objective, So yeah, this totally resonates with me.
Ashley, this might be a good question for you. Someone just asked this really, really great question. She works with children from birth to 3 years old and was wondering how to help parents kind of understand the different ways that children are beginning to name and use their emotions, and what tips you might have for working with parents and helping parents understand supporting how to best support their children.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And ultimately, parents are such important partners, right? With especially in those early, in any classroom, but especially in the early years, right? When, it's imperative that we're reinforcing the concepts that we're teaching in the classroom. So I would say, one, keeping open lines of communication. So what I always had was a parent newsletter of sorts that gave prompts that parents could talk about with their children at home that kind of piggybacked off of some of the SEL concepts we were discussing in the classroom. And I also think teaching parents how to do things like positive narration when they notice things that are really healthy behaviors with their students, right? I noticed. Wait.
Did she just say they're teaching parents? Did she just say that they are teaching parents how to positively reinforce positive behaviors with their students? Did I mishear that? Hang on. We need to rewind. I apologize.
I would say, one, keeping open lines of communication. So what I always had was a parent newsletter of sorts that gave prompts that parents could talk about with their children
What
at
the
home
fuck?
that kind of piggybacked off of some of the SEL concepts we were discussing in the classroom. And I also think teaching parents how to do things like positive narration when they notice things that are really healthy behaviors with their students, right? Like,
the teachers are teaching parents how to parent their students. The teachers have taken such ownership over the just think about this for a second. The teachers are taking such ownership over the children that they believe are their children, that they are proactively teaching parents how to parent children to their standards. Yes, this is exactly the correct term. Yes. These people are control freaks. Absolutely correct. They are not your kids. No, Chase, I don't think the parents are seeing this as a huge red flag, and that is a fucking problem. That is a problem. What the hell? This is why we watch Happy Hour, folks. This is why we watch full form trainings from start to finish, because there will always be at least one or two what the fuck moments in any one of these trainings. So there's a lot of boring. I understand that. That's why we have alcohol. That's why we have cocktails to help us get through the boring. Because inevitably, at some point, we will reach the what the fuck moments. And these are important moments to know about because it tells us what these people are actually doing.
you know, I noticed you doing X, Y, Z, and just like providing that positive reinforcement and consistent language of what's being used in the school setting too. So I don't know if you guys have other best practices to add on.
I was going to say to giving them names for their emotions. Mm-hmm. You know, there's happy, sad, angry, but there's also more complex emotions too. And even though they're young, they can pick up on that too. You know, are you feeling sadness? Or are you feeling shame? Or are you feeling tired? You know, because, you know, tired, ashamed, nervous, those can feel very similar, you know, so just giving them different names and asking them questions and modeling with that narration that you're talking about too, I think can be really powerful, even if they're not even speaking yet, especially if they're not speaking yet.
Well, and this seems like such a simple method, but I don't know, it always worked with my kids when they were little, but when they would have like their freak out moments, you know, when they're 3 years old and they're toddlers and they don't really know what those emotions are, I would say, okay, we're going to count to 10 and then you can. And that's such a basic, right? But I would say, okay, let's count to 10. And we'd count to 10 together. And usually by that time, they weren't screaming or crying or something anymore. And then you could calmly say, okay, now talk to me about what's happening. Because sometimes when they get in that emotional, then they sort of spiral, right? So just giving them that count to 10. And it seems like such a simple thing to do. And it doesn't mean they're not sad anymore or they're not nervous anymore, but at least they have a little bit more calmness to try to name it, you know?
Yeah, they can't process when they're in that heightened stress response.
That's a good tip for adults too, by the way.
Right?
I do have to exactly. Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention is another tactic, you know, especially for that 0 to 3 age range, is some of those visual cues I have in the Reflection Center, I also provided to parents at home so students could have a consistent way of expressing themselves. So think of it like, you know, if you've ever been in a doctor's office or a hospital and there's like the 0 to 10 scale of emotions, or, I mean, in that case, it's usually like pain or something. But, you know, providing cues like that at home students can point to, again, as they're developing the appropriate vocabulary to express their feelings, usually helps to prevent a lot of the escalated behaviors, because students don't usually lash out unless they don't feel heard or they don't have that like self-regulation, and those visual cues are a way to help them express their feelings and self-regulate before it gets to that boiling point, you know. So that would be my recommendation as well.
Can I share one thing on that note? Okay. I'm sure many of you are familiar with zones of regulation, but I had a student who would come to me for breaks but not be ready to talk right away, and we used color-coded little
0 to
system.
3.
I had these little lights that stuck on the wall, and I put red, green, yellow, and blue tissue paper over them, and when he came in the room, he would silently let me know how he was doing by pressing one of the lights on, and I knew that when the red light was on, he wasn't ready to talk. But when the green light was on,
what the
yellow,
fuck?
he was,
what the fuck?
there,
what
right?
the fuck? What the fuck? Okay, one of my first interactions with this type of lunacy is I used to go to a conference every single year. I went to this conference. I went to this conference 11 years in a row. And this conference at one point was really good. And it was really beneficial for me. And it was a lot of people in a community that I knew. And like, these were people that I cared about. These were people that were my friends. And then in the last couple of years of that conference, I shit you not, they started implementing a policy. And this is for adults. They started implementing a policy that when people checked in to get their name badge for the conference, they would also get a series of stickers. And those stickers would be red and yellow and green. This is the last 2 years I went to this conference. Red, yellow, and green. And if you put a red sticker on your conference badge as an adult, that meant that people were not to approach you and introduce yourself because you were just not a social person and you didn't want to talk to anyone else. And you had to display that on your conference fucking ID badge. If you had a green sticker on your conference ID badge, that meant that you were open to meeting new people. If you had a yellow sticker on your conference ID badge, it would be like, you know, maybe, maybe not, just depending. Please ask me if I'm comfortable meeting new people before you introduce yourself. They also had pronoun stickers. I was like, dude, I refused. I fucking refused to do the sticker thing. I fucking refused. I was like, and this was before I was red pilled. I was like, this is fucking stupid. You're telling me that an adult at a conference needs a fucking green sticker on their badge in order to act like an adult and have an adult conversation? This was at a higher education conference, of course. Yes, part of the point of going to conferences is to network. Yes, exactly. Yeah. This was at a higher education conference about when was this? 2017, 2018-ish. I think my last year there was 2019 when I was just like, I'm over this shit. I'm not doing it anymore. I am over this shit. It was so stupid. Anyway, let's wrap this up.
Then he hit the green, and then he would know, it would be like him saying, okay, please help me now. So that can be another thing, especially if your kids aren't talking yet, so that they can let you know what state they're in, even though you know what state they're in.
100%. That's amazing because it's also teaching them, like, I mean, this is a silly example, but some adults don't like to talk in the morning, and it's teaching them to put down, like, you know, to advocate for themselves and say, this is what I personally need right now, and I can communicate it in a way that other people can respect what I need. I think that's huge. Really quickly, one of the attendees just dropped 2 other resources into the chat and that I wanted to share out. So there's a good book called Negotiating Opportunities by Jessica Calarco. And we can send this out in a follow-up email as well, but Negotiating Opportunities. And then the Sesame Street in Communities has some good newsletters for folks to be able to use and send out to their families as well.
Sesame Street, really?
So Sesame Street has so many great resources, but their newsletters, I think, are supposed to help with parent communication as well. I can't believe we're already at time. This has been such a great conversation, but and I know we could keep talking about it for hours and hours and hours, but I've learned so much from listening to all of you share your best practices. Any concluding thoughts as we wrap this up about SEL, student well-being, just tips for educators? Any last takeaways or concluding thoughts?
I just want to reiterate something that Kendall said, because she said that we have to start taking care of ourselves as educators. And I think that's something that's really, really important to remember.
It always comes back to the teachers. The teachers care about themselves more than they care about anything else. It always comes back to the self-care for the teachers. Teachers are just so stressed out. And teachers just have, so much going on that really, before they teach students how to read, write, or do math, what the teachers really need to do is focus on themselves. And they need to have spa day, really. Like, they need a spa day. They need a massage, because self-care for teachers is really the most important thing. Really, and teachers shouldn't even be necessary for teachers to, actually go into school and teach children. Because really, it's all about self-care for the teachers and making sure teacher mental health is really, the priority above all else. It always comes back to the teachers every single fucking time. Every single time. Yes, I think this is a great question. Why aren't we teaching kids in school social skills like how to introduce themselves instead of teaching them how to disable themselves? I think that is a great question. Great question. They do treat everyone like they're autistic. And there's nothing wrong with being autistic. There's nothing wrong with that. But not everyone is autistic. Some people are and some people aren't. It's just the way it goes. God.
We as educators take on the stress of our students. And if we're not okay, that conveys itself in the classroom. And you guys, we're losing a lot of people in our profession to burnout, and
good.
We love our students and we want to do the best for them, but you can't.
They're not your kids.
Too. So I think that just wanted to reiterate that Kendall said that, and just remember that. Take care of yourselves.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
You can't do anything from yourself unless you are in the right good space.
And there will always be more to do, so, if you're always working after hours, they'll always know that you're willing to do so. And take care of yourself, and also, talk to each other. When I was a teacher, I had a hard time sharing with my fellow teachers how I was feeling, because I didn't want to bring them down, but I think there's a way that you can do it that makes each other feel seen too. And kind of, once you start talking about that, you realize that taking 10 minutes a day to talk to your class and work on these things is not going to have a dramatic impact on, it's not going to cause learning loss, but not addressing it at all will. Mm-hmm. So, be patient with yourself and give yourself
No, we are not implementing stickers on the Zoom. That is not going to happen.
Have fun with your students sometimes.
We're going to act like adults.
We focus so much on all the stuff that's going on, we forget to have fun with the kids.
100%. And I would also just add in there that I'd encourage you to think about what's in your locus of control and run with it, even if your school doesn't have a formal SEL program or curriculum. So, as we talked about today, how does your classroom's physical environment support an emotionally safe space for all students? How do you promote supportive relationships in all classroom interactions and spotlight healthy behaviors and responsible decision-making with positive narration or those other tactics? And all of those things can happen separate from an SEL curriculum and can happen through the course of the day-to-day. So I would just encourage you to think about how you want to reflect it in your own classrooms and run with it.
I love that. And flip the script. I think we're in a time of disruption in education. And so I think let's disrupt it for good. And let's think about how we can, academics are obviously very important, but no child is going to reach their true potential unless they have the skills that they need to be able to be that global citizen that Tina talked about earlier. So, wow, thank you all so much. This was really, really, really impactful, and I learned so much, and I hope our attendees did as well. But really appreciate you taking the time, both Tina, Kendall, and Ashley to join us from Riverside, and then all of our educators that are online to join us today. We hope this was helpful for you as you think about preparing for the next school year. And if you enjoyed it, we hope you'll be able to join us for our final 3 For Educators by Educators conversations in the upcoming 3 weeks. But with that, I'll close this out for today.
All right, guys, that looks like all she wrote for today. So we learned a couple important things. We learned that teachers really do think that they are their kid, that your children are their kids and not your kids. We learned that teachers are asking kids to keep private diaries that they're only sharing with the teachers. We learned that teachers are taping printed teddy bears to the wall and calling it the tattletale and telling children to go and talk to the teddy bear rather than actually be normal human beings. There was some normal stuff in that. There was some crazy shit in that. But guys, I hope you enjoyed. Wow, that's not a real word. Enjoyed learning what teachers are actually teaching your kids today. We do happy hours at Friday, every Friday at 5 p.m. on youtube.com/activelyunwoke. I've also got you on Odyssey, on Rockfin, and on Rumble, so I can see some people have been enjoying the show over on those sites. Thank you guys for watching on all tech platforms too. Please mount that like button on your way out the door, and I will see you guys. I've got a couple podcast recordings that are going to go up in this coming week. I've actually got like 3 different podcast recordings, and the reason there haven't been podcasts lately is because my recorder has been like broken for some reason. I had to get tech support for it. It was a goddamn shit show. But like there are going to be 3 different podcasts coming up this week for the Actively Unwoke podcast. That's going to be on YouTube, also on iTunes, Spotify, or Apple, whatever the fuck. Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever. Anyway, guys, have a great rest of your Friday. Take care, and we will see you guys very soon.